Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio Channel. Tonight we slip into the damp darkness of Louisiana in 1835, where the river looks peaceful from a distance, and the cane fields shimmer like something almost beautiful. You can hear insects pulsing in the reeds, frogs calling from black water, and the far clank of machinery that never quite lets the night stay quiet. It is a place of sweetness and smoke, of polished silver on planter tables and raw sugar crusting on sweaty hands. And beneath it all sits a question that lingers like mist over the Mississippi. What did it really mean to live, labour, and try to remain human on a sugar plantation, where profit rose from the ground only because people were forced to break themselves for it? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and let me know your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and you begin with the river. You stand on the edge of the Mississippi, where the water moves with a heavy confidence, brown and broad under a sky still faintly violet from dawn. The air is thick already. It settles on your skin like a warm, damp cloth, carrying the smells of mud, cane leaves, wood smoke, animal dung, and something faintly sweet from the mills. The sweetness is not cheerful. It hangs in the air with a burnt edge, as though even sugar here has learned to darken. Louisiana, in 1835, is a place of money, ambition, and coercion. Along the river, plantation houses rise behind rows of oaks, with galleries built to catch any passing breath of air. They can appear graceful if you squint hard enough and ignore what makes them possible. White columns, green shutters, brick paths, gardens clipped into shape. Very elegant, very civilized. That is what the owners would like you to notice, not the cabins, not the cane knives, not the sound of hooves arriving with traders, ledgers, and new demands. The ground near the river is rich, black, and wet. It gives back astonishing crops when forced into order. Sugar cane thrives in this heat, and by the 1830s Louisiana has become the centre of sugar production in the United States. That much is plain historical fact. Planters have learned that cane can make fortunes, and fortunes have a way of attracting men who are willing to call cruelty efficiency. You feel that truth in the landscape itself. Everything has been arranged for extraction. Waterways, levees, roads, labour, time, even daylight seems managed. As the sun rises higher, you walk along the edge of a field and hear the leaves whisper against one another. Sugarcane is taller than a person in many places, green blades cutting at the air. The stalks stand dense and crowded, their roots sunk deep into damp soil. At first glance, there is something almost theatrical about them. A sea of green, bright with dew. But when you step closer, the beauty grows sharp. The edges of the leaves can slice exposed skin. The ground beneath is uneven and sticky. Gnats gather around your face. Mosquitoes whine at your ears. The field is not a painting. It is a machine with roots. And in that machine, black Americans live at the centre of every motion. Some were born in Louisiana. Some were brought from older plantation regions in Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas through the domestic slave trade. Some carried memories of other climates, other crops, other accents. By 1835, many sugar plantations rely on enslaved labourers who have been forced southward as the cotton and sugar frontiers expand. You do not need to imagine chains in every instant to understand the violence. The violence is in sale notices, in shipping lists, in the way a person can be priced by age, strength, and skill, in the way a mother can be counted as labour and a child as future inventory. That is the language used by the market. Chillingly neat. Morning spreads across the plantation in layers of sound. A horn, perhaps, or the call of someone assigned to wake others. Chickens scratch near cabin steps. Mules stamp in their stalls. Somewhere, a child cries and is hushed. The faint metallic ring of tools being lifted rises over the softer noises of bodies stirring from inadequate sleep. You can feel the roughness of split wood on a cabin wall. You can smell last night's ashes. The cabins are small, often crowded, with dirt floors or rough planks. Little privacy. and whatever comfort can be pieced together from scraps, quilts, gourds, baskets, and stubborn care. The people here know the land in ways the owners never truly will. They know which patches stay muddy longest after rain. They know how the cane sounds when wind moves through it before a storm. They know the smell of boiling syrup from far off and what it means for the pace of work. They know which overseers shout first and which wait in silence that somehow feels worse. Their knowledge is intimate, practical, and hard-won. It is also rarely honoured, except when profit requires it. A curious detail drifts through plantation life. On some Louisiana plantations, enslaved people and poor whites alike used chewing sticks or even bits of cane fibre to clean their teeth. And cane juice itself, sticky as it was, could end up in everyday routines because sugar was everywhere and nowhere at once. It is one of those odd little truths history leaves lying around. A world built on sugar, and still most of the people who made it could not enjoy security, comfort, or freedom from hunger. As you move farther inland, the plantation reveals its hierarchy in space. The planter's house sits high, if possible, catching breezes and attention. Work buildings cluster with deliberate purpose. The sugar house stands apart in your senses before it stands apart in sight. You smell it first. Hot molasses, smoke, wet bagasse, grease, and fire. Then you hear it. Creaking rollers, shouted instructions. The steady throb of engines or animal power depending on the estate. By 1835, some larger Louisiana plantations use steam technology in their mills, which increases output and heightens the demand for fast, coordinated labour. That technological improvement does not lighten human suffering. It concentrates it. A machine can pull more cane through in less time, which means more hands must cut, haul, feed, carry, skim, and boil without pause. Even the weather becomes a master here. Sugar planting and processing depend on climate, timing, and relentless urgency. In Louisiana, cane must be cut and ground quickly during harvest before frost ruins the crop. Historians continue to debate exactly how much of plantation discipline was shaped by seasonal necessity and how much by planter ideology, greed, and imitation. But there is no real mystery about the result. The labour was punishing because planters chose a system that demanded punishing labour, then wrapped that choice in the language of agricultural need. Nature gets blamed for a great many human decisions. By mid-morning, the heat grows muscular, it presses against your chest. Sweat runs down backs, darkens cloth, stings cuts made by leaves or tools. Shoes, if people have them, gather mud. Bare feet toughen and crack on packed paths. Hands develop calluses thick as leather. You begin to understand that life here is measured not only in years but in wear. Skin worn by sun, muscles worn by repetition, sleep worn thin by anxiety. Even voices can seem worn, flattened by the knowledge that every day begins under command. And yet the plantation is not silent submission. That is a fantasy planters like to sell about themselves, a tidy fiction in white linen. Real life is more complicated. People speak softly when they need to. They exchange looks that carry whole sentences. They joke, they grieve, they pray, they make choices within terrible limits. An older woman pauses to tie a headscarf tighter against the heat. A man shoulders a tool with the economy of someone saving strength for hours still to come. Children watch everything. They learn quickly because they must. The road near the quarters shows wagon ruts dried hard from earlier use. Splinters of cane lie scattered where carts have passed. A dog noses around the edge of a ditch. Someone has tucked herbs near a doorway, whether for cooking, healing, or both. The smell of crushed mint briefly cuts through smoke and mud. Small acts of arrangement matter here. A swept threshold, a patched shirt, a gourd cup hung within reach. These are not luxuries. They are declarations. You are still a person. You still order what little space can be ordered. The planter, meanwhile, thinks in numbers, acres planted, tons cut, sugar yield, market prices in New Orleans, debt owed to merchants, new equipment purchased on credit. He may consider himself modern, practical, and improved. He may read agricultural journals and discuss drainage, seed cane, and refining methods with an almost tender interest. There is a dry irony in that. A man can debate the ideal thickness of a cane row while ignoring the people bent inside it. He can call himself enlightened because he imports better kettles. New Orleans looms over this world even when it is miles away. The city is the port, the market, the place where sugar moves outward and luxury goods move inward. Ships tie Louisiana plantations to Atlantic commerce, to bankers, insurers, and consumers who want sweetness without seeing the fields. The sugar bowl on a distant table looks innocent enough. It usually does. That is part of the trick. As afternoon light thickens, the colours around you deepen. The river flashes pewter. The cane turns darker green. White egrets lift from a wet patch and float over the field like scraps of torn cloth. For a moment, everything looks hushed. Then a wagon creaks by, and the spell breaks. Nothing here remains still for long. You notice, too, how many kinds of labour shape the plantation beyond the fields. Blacksmithing, carpentry, cooking, washing, child tending, livestock care, repairing levees, cleaning kettles, cutting wood for fuel, carrying water, driving carts. Some enslaved people are prized, in the language of owners, for specialised skills. A sugar boiler, for instance, might hold an important position because refining requires experience and precise timing. Hot syrup can turn from valuable to ruined very quickly. That skill could bring a tiny bit more status within the forced hierarchy of the plantation, but never true safety. Expertise improved the master's profits first. The emotional climate is as real as the physical one. Fear travels. So does rumour. News of sales, punishments, debts, illnesses, births, and runaways passes from mouth to mouth. Not in grand speeches, in murmurs while carrying tools, in whispers near cooking fires, in fragments on the path between work sites. People measure danger constantly. Who is watching? Who is angry? Who is ill? Who might help? Who cannot? The plantation day stretches, but your attention keeps returning to the strange split in the place. Everything beautiful contains strain. Sunlight on the river, cane tassels waving pale against blue sky, magnolia scent drifting from the big house garden. Then the harsher notes push through, smoke in the throat, mud sucking at ankles, flies settling on a face too tired to swat them away. This is how sugar country presents itself. Charm above, hardness beneath. Sometimes not even beneath. Sometimes in plain sight. As evening approaches, the humidity does not quite ease. The sky glows amber, then rose, then a bruised purple over the flat horizon. Frogs begin again. The cane fields darken into walls. Smoke from cooking fires rises in thin blue strands near the quarters. You can smell cornmeal, salt pork, beans if there are any, maybe greens, maybe not enough of anything. A baby fusses. Someone hums under their breath. A screen door at the big house snaps shut with brisk certainty. Insects take over the soundscape in 1,000 tiny metallic pulses. And here, in the gathering dark of 1835 Louisiana, one truth becomes impossible to miss. Sugar is not just a crop. It is a system that reaches into sleep, appetite, movement, weather, architecture, family life, and fear. For Black Americans on these plantations, it shapes the entire horizon of each day. It tells them where to stand, when to rise, how fast to move, what pain to ignore, and how much of themselves they must fight to keep hidden from a world determined to reduce them to labour. Still, hidden does not mean gone. Under the loud machinery, under the river trade, under the polished confidence of the planter class, human feeling remains stubborn. You sense it in the way a hand rests for 1 second on another shoulder, in the low cadence of a voice turning a warning into something that sounds casual, in the look exchanged across a yard at dusk. Small things, quiet things, but very real. Night settles fully at last. The stars appear above the levee. The river keeps moving, heavy and indifferent. From somewhere in the dark, there comes the faint smell of sugar again, sweet and singed, drifting over cabins and cane alike. It is the scent of wealth for some, exhaustion for others, and memory for everyone who breathes it. You stand still and listen, as the plantation exhales into uneasy rest, never truly peaceful, never truly asleep. You enter Louisiana in the season of movement, when money travels on paper and people are forced to travel in chains, on foot, by wagon, or by boat. The roads are damp in places, dusty in others, and always marked by traffic that serves somebody's ambition. Horses sweat under harness, wheels grind through ruts. Flatboats and steamboats carry cargo toward New Orleans, and among the cotton bales, barrels, crates, and sacks, the slave trade hums with its own terrible efficiency. Here, the buying and selling of black lives is not hidden behind closed doors. It is organized, discussed, advertised, negotiated, and justified with the chilly confidence of commerce. In 1835, sugar planters in Louisiana want laborers who can survive extreme work. That is how the buyers phrase it. Survive. Strong, prime, sound, good-breeding woman, likely boy, field hand, mechanic, cook, nurse. Every label shrinks a human being into a category the market can sort. The domestic slave trade, moving people from the upper South into the deep South, has become one of the great engines of this era. That is one of the clearest facts of the period. Enslaved people are sold from older tobacco regions into expanding cotton and sugar zones, where the demand for labor is fierce and the profits can be enormous. Louisiana sugar, with its brutal harvest and milling schedule, develops a reputation for especially punishing conditions. Buyers know it. Sellers know it. The people being sold know it too. You stand near a market yard in New Orleans and hear the city before you fully see it. Water slaps against the wharf. Dock workers shout in French, English, and accents from half the Atlantic world. Cartwheels rattle over uneven surfaces. Somewhere nearby, a bell rings. The air smells of river mud, tar, sweat, tobacco, coffee, horse manure, and stale rum. The city is alive in that restless port city way. But beneath the noise sits a cruel order. Brokers and traders keep records. Buyers compare prices. Doctors or inspectors may examine bodies, teeth, muscles, posture, scars, age, skin, eyesight. A person may be told to turn around, open their mouth, walk a few steps, lift an arm, stand straighter. You can feel the humiliation in every instruction. Some sales happen publicly, some happen in traders' offices, private yards, or auction rooms. The method changes, but the logic stays the same. Men in hats confer over figures. Women are looked at for labour and for childbearing, because enslavers calculate future children as future property. Teenagers are watched as investments. Children may be sold with a mother, or not. Husbands and wives can be separated because sentiment does not fit neatly into account books. Traders use polished language when needed. Planters do the same. The euphemisms are almost impressive in their shamelessness. Families are not broken, they are rearranged. A person is not terrified, they are unsettled. A sale is not violence, it is transfer. Human beings have always been very inventive when trying to make cruelty sound administrative. You notice clothing first because it says so much. Some enslaved people on display are dressed more carefully than usual by sellers, hoping to raise the price. Clean shirts, better shoes, perhaps borrowed or temporary, hair arranged, faces washed. The point is not dignity, the point is presentation. A well-presented body might bring more money. But the Polish is thin. Tension lives in the shoulders. Eyes move constantly, reading the room for clues. A mother keeps one child pressed near her leg if she still has that chance. A young man tries to appear steady under inspection. An older woman knows exactly what the buyers are measuring, and exactly what they are refusing to see. For sugar country, age matters sharply. Buyers often seek young adults, especially men, for field labour and mill work. Though women are heavily demanded too because plantation systems require labour across every task. Sugar is not just about cutting cane. It needs cooks, boilers, washers, carriers, carpenters, teamsters, ditchers, nurses, and domestic workers. Children are folded into labour systems as soon as they can be, starting with small jobs and increasing demands. Buyers speak of versatility with approving nods. What they mean is this: they want bodies that can be pushed hard, shifted between tasks, and forced to adapt to any need. You walk past a trader's office and see a board listing names, ages, and short descriptions. The language is brief, but the silences are vast. There is no line for grief, no line for the child left behind in Virginia, no line for the fear of being sent to sugar rather than cotton. That fear is not imaginary. Within the enslaved community, Louisiana sugar can carry a special dread. Work there is known to be relentless, especially during harvest and grinding season. Some contemporaries even call sugar plantations places where people are worn down with shocking speed. Historians disagree on the precise comparisons between sugar and cotton mortality from estate to estate, because records vary and some planters kept self-serving accounts. But many scholars agree that Louisiana sugar labour ranked among the harshest forms of plantation work in the United States. You hear fragments of bargaining from inside an office. One buyer wants a lower price because a man has an old injury to the wrist. Another wants assurance that a woman is healthy and capable of bearing children. A trader insists that a teenage boy is accustomed to hard labour. Pens scratch across paper. A glass clinks softly on a desk. Outside, the sun glares on the street, and the brightness makes the whole arrangement seem even more obscene. Commerce in full daylight. Nothing coy about it. A strange little detail survives from the world of slave markets. Traders sometimes used oils, better meals, or brief rest to improve the appearance of people they planned to sell, almost like preparing livestock for fair inspection. It is a quirky fact in the grimmest possible sense. It shows how appearance could be managed to maximize profit, even while the people being prepared carried private wounds no grooming could conceal. From New Orleans, some enslaved people are purchased directly and sent upriver toward plantations. Others arrive from inland sales, estate divisions, debt settlements, or inheritance disputes. A planter may attend an auction himself or send an agent with instructions. The instructions are practical, never moral. Spend no more than this. Seek a boiler with experience. Buy a woman with 2 children if the terms are favourable. Avoid anyone judged troublesome. The word troublesome deserves a bitter smile. It could mean injured. It could mean resistant. It could mean unwilling to fake cheerfulness while being sold. When the journey to a sugar plantation begins, the movement itself becomes another form of suffering. You can imagine the cramped motion of a boat, the smell of wet rope and wood, the nausea of river travel, the uncertainty at every landing, or the grind of a wagon road, jostling over rough ground while heat presses down from above. Dust clings to sweat. Mosquitoes gather near marshy stretches. Night camps bring little rest. Some people travel in groups, bound by shared danger if not prior acquaintance. Others travel almost alone, watched by traders or escorts. Every bend in the road carries a terrible possibility. This could be the place where your life narrows further. This could be the place where no familiar face remains. You step onto an upriver landing near a plantation purchase, and the landscape opens into wealth shaped by force. Oaks line a drive. Cane fields spread beyond the house. The levee rises nearby, holding back the river's moods as if human engineering can dominate all things. The planter arrives with practiced eyes. He's not meeting people, at least not in his own mind. He's assessing assets. One man's shoulders, a woman's hands, a child's age. He may ask whether they know how to hoe, cook, wash, drive mules, or work near kettles. He may seem calm, even courteous. That can be worse. Rage is ugly, but politeness can make ownership sound reasonable. The newly purchased feel the plantation first through atmosphere. The smell of cane and smoke, the line of cabins, the watchful faces of those already living there. The sense that everyone around you understands the rules before you do. New arrivals must learn quickly. Who gives orders, where water is drawn, when horns sound, which pathways matter, which expressions are safest. It is not just the work that must be learned. It is the emotional weather of the place. Those already on the plantation respond in many ways to newcomers: curiosity, sympathy, caution, quiet welcome, sometimes suspicion, because every arrival changes the balance of labour, punishment, and attention. Some newly purchased people bring useful skills, songs, recipes, herbal knowledge, language patterns, or religious practices from other regions. Louisiana plantations are not culturally flat. They pull people together from different parts of the South, and sometimes from Caribbean or Creole backgrounds as well. This creates a complex human world within the violence. Speech rhythms mix. Cooking methods adapt. Names carry old geographies into new soil. Sorrow travels with them too. You watch a family being sorted in the yard by a driver under instructions from the overseer. A woman and her 2 small children are assigned cabin space with another household because room is scarce. A man bought in the same lot is sent elsewhere because no one cares whether they know one another. A girl of about 12 is directed toward domestic work for now, though that may change whenever convenience requires it. Such scenes happen not once, but repeatedly across the slave South. The system depends on disruption. Familiar ties are an obstacle to easy control, yet they survive more often than enslavers expect. People make kin where they can. They claim one another in whispers, in care, in memory, in shared meals, in naming. The first night after purchase can feel unreal. You lie on rough bedding or boards, hearing insects scream in the dark and frogs pulse from the wet ground. Someone nearby coughs. A baby whimpers. The air does not cool enough. The smell of old smoke sits in the cabin walls. Every small sound becomes loaded with meaning. Boots outside, low voices, laughter from the big house, a door opening, a latch falling shut. Sleep comes in scraps because the mind keeps trying to map the unknown. How early will they wake us? How hard is the field? Who might help? Is there anyone from home within miles? Questions turn slowly in the dark and never quite settle. Morning arrives without gentleness. New labourers may be introduced to tasks almost immediately, especially if the plantation is busy or short-handed. A driver demonstrates a row. An older field hand tells you where to stand. Someone shows how to cut cane low, how to strip leaves, how to bundle stalks, how not to waste motion. The instruction is practical because wasted motion costs energy, and energy is painfully limited. On some plantations, newcomers to sugar work struggle with the pace and the specific physical demands, especially if they came from regions focused on different crops. Planters notice. Overseers notice. The body learns fast or it suffers faster. There is scholarly uncertainty around how much agency buyers really allowed themselves in selecting labourers versus how often credit, debt, and market fluctuations constrain their choices. Some planters boasted of carefully building ideal workforces by age, sex, and skill. Others bought whoever they could afford when they could afford them. What remains certain is that those calculations treated black lives as components in an agricultural machine. Human complexity entered the ledger only when it affected yield or resale value. At midday, the sun hangs white and flat over the plantation, and you begin to sense another bitter layer of this world. Purchase does not end with the sale. It continues each day through the demand to justify the price. A person bought dearly must be made to produce dearly. That expectation drives everything. The owner remembers the number in his books. The overseer remembers the owner's moods. The driver remembers the overseer's punishments. Pressure flows downward like hot syrup, thick, slow, suffocating. Still, something remains beyond purchase. It is there when an older woman quietly tells a newcomer where the shade falls longest near the quarters. It is there when someone shares a swallow of water without drawing notice. It is there in the stubborn refusal to let the trader's description be the final truth. Field hand, girl, prime male, good breeder, useful cook. Those labels hover in the air, but they do not exhaust the person beneath them. A man remembers the creek near his childhood home. A woman remembers a hymn her mother sang softly at night. A child remembers the shape of a hand once held. Memory does not stop being real because a bill of sale says otherwise. As evening settles over the plantation, the new arrivals stand at the edge of a life not chosen and not easily escaped. The cane leaves rustle in the warm wind. Smoke threads upward from cooking fires. The sky deepens into copper, then indigo. Someone speaks in a low voice from a cabin doorway, offering directions, warning, or comfort. Perhaps all three. In that fading light, the market language begins to loosen its grip, if only for a breath. Buyers may have counted muscle and age, but they did not buy the whole interior world. They never could. They bought labour by law and force. They claimed bodies. They priced skills. They split families. They moved people like cargo toward the harvest. Yet even here, under the weight of ownership, each person arrives carrying a self that cannot be fully entered in any ledger. You wake into the harvest before the sky has fully chosen a colour. The darkness is not silent. It hums with insects, rustles with cane leaves, and carries the low, uneasy sounds of people rising before they are ready. A horn, a knock, a shout, the creak of a door, and the whole plantation begins to stir with the dread precision of a place that has been waiting all night to demand more. The air feels wet and cool for a few minutes, though even that coolness has weight. It settles on your skin and clothes, then slips away as the first grey light spreads over the fields. This is the season that rules everything. Sugar cane must be cut when it is ripe, then carried to the mill and ground quickly before its value declines. In Louisiana, that urgency is sharpened by the threat of frost. Once harvest begins, every hour matters. This is one of the central facts of the sugar world. Grinding season is not just busy, it is relentless. The entire plantation reorganizes around speed, volume, and endurance, and black Americans forced to labor here bear the full burden of that demand. Sleep shrinks. Meals become hurried. Bodies are pushed deeper into fatigue. Even the landscape seems to tense up. At first light, the cane fields look beautiful in a way that feels almost insulting. Dew clings to the blades. Pale tassels catch the morning. Rows stretch outward in elegant lines. Birds rise from the edges where ditches hold dark water. For a breath or two, the place could fool someone passing by in a carriage. Then the work starts, and beauty becomes something sharp and unhelpful. Cutting cane is exhausting from the first swing. You grip a cane knife or billhook with stiff fingers and step into the row where the stalks crowd close around you. Leaves brush your face and slice at your wrists. The stalks must be cut low, near the ground, where the sweetest part grows, and every motion matters. Swing, bend, pull, strip, stack, swing, bend, pull, strip, stack. The rhythm settles into your shoulders and lower back almost at once. Soon your palms sting. Sap sticks to your hands. Bits of dry leaf cling to your shirt and neck. The sweet smell of crushed cane mixes with the green smell of broken stalks and the sour smell of sweat. Many people in the field work with astonishing speed, not because they are untouched by pain, but because they have learned what delay costs. An overseer may ride the edges of the field, a driver may move on foot between rows. Commands come sharply, faster, lower, clean the stalk, keep up. The pressure is constant, but so is the knowledge of technique. Older hands know how to save a little energy by controlling the swing, how to keep the body moving with the least waste, how to avoid dulling the blade too quickly. The skill is real, though it is trapped inside forced labour and never recognised as craft in the way planters admire their own machinery. Wagons wait at the edge of the field. Mules stamp and flick their tails. Cane is loaded high, the cut ends pale and wet, the stripped leaves falling in messy drifts underfoot. Teamsters guide loads toward the mill, and more cutters keep moving down the rows. During harvest, the plantation seems to split into linked currents. One current cuts, another hauls, another feeds the rollers, another works the boiling house, another carries fuel, empties refuse, cleans vats, moves syrup, tends fires, and begins the process again. It is agriculture behaving like industry, and the result feels less like a farm than a living engine. By mid-morning the sun is stronger and the humidity thickens. The field becomes close, almost airless between the tall rows. Insects settle on exposed skin. Mud grip shoes or feet near damp patches. Cane leaves whip back when bent and lash your cheek. Somewhere nearby, a person coughs with the deep, rough sound of a throat used too hard and rested too little. The smell of earth rises under the heat. You taste salt on your upper lip. There is no comfortable way to stand for long. Bend too often and your back screams. Stay upright too long and your arms grow heavy as boards. Sugar harvest in Louisiana often required gang labour, with groups organised by age, strength, and skill. That is another plain fact of plantation management. Strong adult field hands usually formed the hard driving core, but women also cut, stripped, carried, and performed heavy labour in large numbers, while children and older people were assigned supporting tasks according to what they could be forced to do. Planters liked categories because categories made command easier. Real bodies, of course, did not always cooperate. People became ill. Pregnant women were made to work past reason. Aging labourers could not keep pace. Children watched and learned the logic of exhaustion early. A curious detail from sugar country slips into view when the cane trash begins to pile up. The dry leaves stripped from the stalks, often called trash, could be used in practical ways around the plantation, including bedding, rough fodder mixing, or fuel support, depending on local practice. Even refuse was expected to be useful. In a system built on maximising every scrap, nothing escaped being folded back into labour. By noon, the field has changed its sound. Morning begins with individual motions, but later the whole place develops a collective rasp. Knives striking stalks, bundles thudding to the ground, wheels groaning under loads, mules snorting, orders thrown over distance, somewhere in the background. The mill begins its steady mechanical voice, the heavy repetitive sound that reminds everyone the harvest is not only about cutting, it is about feeding the mill without pause. If too little cane arrives, workers inside the sugar house are blamed. If too much arrives and clogs the flow, others are blamed. Blame moves easily here. Relief does not. Food at midday comes quickly, if at all in comfort. You crouch or stand in whatever patch of shade can be stolen, cornmeal, perhaps, salt pork if rations allow, a little molasses, water warm from a container. The meal disappears almost before the body understands it has arrived. Then the work resumes. There is no gentle return, no easing back in. The afternoon begins as if the morning never happened. Heat settles into muscle in a particular way during harvest. It makes motion feel both urgent and slowed, as though every task is pushing through warm syrup. Your shirt clings to your back. Fine cuts from cane leaves burn under sweat. The handle of the knife rubs a blister wider. You begin to measure time not by the sun, but by the aching sequence of body parts. Hands first, then shoulders, then lower back, then thighs. Later, everything together. There is scholarly debate about exactly how much output an average cutter could achieve in a day under Louisiana conditions, because plantation records often exaggerate productivity or hide the unevenness of weather, soil, and resistance. Historians still argue over the precision of planter numbers, but nobody seriously doubts the central point. Harvest demanded extraordinary physical effort, and planters pushed for results that treated human endurance as something to be mined. The field never fully belongs to the master, no matter how much he claims it. Within the rows, people create small spaces of mutual awareness that power cannot entirely erase. A warning is murmured when an overseer is coming close. Someone nudges a dropped tool into easier reach. A stronger worker briefly takes the heavier side of a load from someone faltering beside them. These moments are tiny. They do not stop the harvest. Still, they matter. The plantation depends on extraction, but life inside it also depends on quiet acts of help that the official record will never mention. As the day slides toward evening, the pace often grows harsher rather than softer, because the mill must keep turning. Loads continue to arrive. Cutters try to finish a row. Teamsters curse under their breath at stuck wheels. Children gather loose cane or perform errands under watchful eyes. Dust rises where the ground is dry, and in wetter patches. Boots sink with a sucking sound that makes each step harder. The sun reddens at the horizon, but nobody mistakes that for mercy. Then darkness comes and the harvest does not end. This is one of the most feared parts of grinding season. Work continues into the night because cane cannot wait. Torches or lanterns throw uncertain light over the yard and mill approaches. Shadows lurch across wagon wheels and brick walls. Smoke hangs lower in the damp air. The smell of hot juice and boiling syrup grows stronger, thick enough to taste. In the field, late cutters move through rows that feel deeper and stranger in the dark, the leaves whispering against one another with a dry, secretive sound. In the yard, tired mules sway at the traces. Men and women carry on because stopping is not really a choice they are allowed. Night labour alters the senses. Distances become harder to judge. The light catches faces in fragments, eyes, cheekbones, sweat on a forehead, then darkness again. Every sound seems either closer or farther than it is. The mill groans, metal rings, fire snaps. Someone laughs once, very briefly, at something too small to hear, and the laugh vanishes almost as soon as it is born. Fatigue makes the world feel unreal, but the body keeps moving from habit and command. On some plantations, shifts formed for parts of the grinding cycle, especially inside the mill and boiling house, where work ran nearly non-stop during peak season. On others, labour could collapse into one long ordeal with only brief interruptions. The exact organisation varied, yet the result remained the same. Enslaved workers lost control over the boundary between day and night. The season swallowed ordinary time. Dawn no longer meant beginning. Dusk no longer meant rest. Everything became harvest. The emotional strain of this matters as much as the physical strain. Exhaustion erodes speech. It blunts appetite. It makes tempers fragile and fear more immediate. A person who might normally sing under their breath says nothing. A child falls asleep sitting upright for a moment before being shaken awake. A woman stares into the dark while chewing, too tired even to complain. Yet there are also stubborn survivals of spirit. A phrase traded quietly. A prayer whispered while lifting a bundle. A joke so dry it barely sounds like one. Human beings are strangely talented at smuggling themselves through systems designed to flatten them. Near the mill yard, the ground becomes sticky from spilled juice and churned mud. Your shoes drag. The smell of crushed cane is stronger here, green and wet at first, then transformed by heat into something darker, richer, almost caramelized. Steam curls against the night. Sparks rise from the furnace mouth and vanish upward. It feels as though the plantation has grown its own weather. Hot fog, smoke, sweetness, ash. It coats your throat. It settles in your hair and clothes. You carry it with you even if you walk away. A young worker passing with a bundle of stripped stalks has bits of cane fibre in his hair and dried mud at the hem of his trousers. An older woman flexes her hand once before gripping the knife again. A driver glances toward the overseer, measuring the mood before he speaks. A wagon wheel strikes a stone and jolts violently, spilling a few stalks into the yard. Everything in harvest is movement under pressure. Even mistakes have velocity. It is easy for outsiders to romanticize sugar because sugar enters the world as pleasure. Cakes, tea, preserves, elegant desserts, bright crystals in porcelain bowls. But here, at the sight of its making, pleasure feels absurdly distant. Sugar begins as cut hands, bent backs, aching legs, and eyes burning from lack of sleep. It begins with labour timed against weather and profit. It begins with the fact that some lives were legally owned so that sweetness could become ordinary for others. Late in the night, when the stars are sharp above the fields and the frogs sound louder from the ditches, the harvest develops a strange, dreamlike quality. People move as though inside a story they did not choose. Light flickers over faces and tools. Cane stalks gleam pale where they have been cut. Smoke drifts low. The mill keeps speaking in its heavy, repetitive tongue. Your body feels separated into fragments, each one sore, each one still required. And yet, even now, the roos are not empty of thought. People remember names, songs, places, warnings. They count children. They mark who is sick. They notice who has gone too quiet. They carry private worlds inside public exhaustion. The harvest tries to reduce everyone to function, but inwardly the mind resists with memory, calculation, and feeling. Sometimes resistance is as small as deciding that the overseer's estimate of your worth is a lie. Sometimes it is as practical as hiding a little strength for the hour when you will need it most. At the edge of the field, The last card of the night lurches toward the mill, the lantern light bobs, cane leaves glisten with dew returning, your hands are sticky, your shoulders roar with fatigue, and your ears ring with the endless machinery of the season. The plantation has taken the shape of one command repeated in 100 forms. Cut more, carry more, feed the rollers, keep moving. But beneath that command, another reality persists, quieter and more stubborn. The harvest may consume the hours, but it cannot make the people inside it less human. It can drain the body. It can crowd out rest. It can fill the air with heat, smoke, and sweet residue. Yet every swing of the knife, every shared glance in the dark, every breath dragged through the thick night remains the action of a person enduring something forced upon them, not the motion of a machine built for cane. You leave the field and step toward the heart of the plantation's machinery, where sugar stops looking like a plant and begins to look like a product. The air changes before the building comes fully into view. It grows hotter, thicker, and heavier with smoke. A sweet, burnt smell clings to the throat, mixed with grease, wet fibre, ash, and the metallic odour of iron heated by friction and fire. Even outside, the ground is slick in places from spilled juice and trampled cane. Wheels have cut deep ruts into the yard. Men shout over the noise. Mules stamp. Steam drifts from vents and open doors, rising into the evening air like the building is breathing. The sugar house does not welcome anybody gently. Inside, the first thing you notice is the sound. Not one sound, but many layered together. The rollers grind with a heavy crunching rhythm. Belts or gears clatter. Syrup bubbles in kettles. Ladles strike rims. Fire roars under brick furnaces. Someone gives an order. Someone else answers. The building is full of heat, motion, and hazard. It feels more like a factory than the quiet pastoral image a plantation owner might prefer to sell at dinner. Louisiana sugar production in the 1830s depended on increasingly complex processing methods, and many large plantations used mills powered by steam engines or by animal and water power, depending on their means and location. That much is well established. The practical result is plain enough at your feet. This room turns cut cane into cash, and it does so by demanding constant labour under brutal conditions. Freshly cut cane enters the mill to be crushed between rollers that squeeze out the juice. The stalks groan and splinter as they pass through. Fibres spray. Wet fragments slap the floor. The juice runs into channels or vats, cloudy and pale green at first, carrying bits of dirt and plant matter that must be skimmed and managed. The squeezed remains of the cane, called bagasse, pile up in damp heaps or are moved away for drying and later use as fuel. Nothing here is wasted if the owner can help it. Even what looks exhausted still has value to someone with a ledger. Workers feed the rollers continuously. It is dangerous work. Hands must guide heavy stalks close to the machinery. Clothing can snag, arms can slip. A moment of distraction can become catastrophe. You feel the risk in the way bodies move around the machine, quick but careful, trained by experience and fear. No one needs a lecture on safety. The rollers themselves are lesson enough. Enslaved workers in sugar mills face serious injury from machinery, burns, collapsing equipment, and long hours in overheated rooms. That is not exaggeration. It is built into the process. Close to the rollers, the air is wet with cane juice and steam. It settles on your face and forearms, leaving a tacky sheen. The floor underfoot is dangerous. Part mud, part syrup, part crushed fibre. Shoes stick and drag. Bare boards or brick become treacherous with every spill. A worker bends to clear debris from a channel, then straightens quickly as a foreman passes. Another hauls bagasse aside with a hook, shoulders gleaming under sweat. Nearby, a young labourer struggles with the weight of a bundle and adjusts his grip before someone sharpens the moment with an impatient shout. Then there is the boiling room. The cane juice must be clarified and reduced through heating, skimming, and careful handling. In many Louisiana sugar houses, the process moves through a series of kettles or pans, each requiring attention at the right moment. Too little heat and the syrup lags, too much, and it scorches. Impurities rise and must be removed. Timing matters immensely. A skilled sugar boiler can be one of the most valued enslaved workers on a plantation, because his knowledge directly affects the quality and price of the final product. That is another mainstream fact of sugar production. Some planters trusted boilers with significant responsibility, yet this trust was never freedom. It simply meant that expertise generated profit. The heat near the kettles is extraordinary. It hits your face first, then spreads over your whole body until your clothes seem to cling more tightly with every breath. The fires beneath the kettles pulse orange through openings in the brickwork. Iron rims glow with residual warmth. Steam lifts in thick bursts, carrying a smell that is richer than raw cane and darker, almost like toasted molasses. Your eyes sting. The hair on your arms feels damp. Men work with long skimmers, paddles and ladles, moving with urgent concentration. They watch the liquid change. They read bubbles, colour, thickness and smell. They know how syrup behaves when it is nearly right and when it is about to go wrong. That knowledge is practical, sensory, and difficult to master. A curious tidbit survives from the world of sugar making. Skilled boilers sometimes judge stages of syrup not only by sight, but by how threads of liquid stretched between fingers or tools, testing texture in ways that sound almost like candy making at home. Except here the room is roaring, the stakes are high, and the labour is coerced. It is one of those details that reminds you how refined knowledge can exist in the roughest settings. You move deeper into the room and hear the language of work become more specialised. Draw it off, skim that, more fuel, watch the strike, lift now. Every phrase is clipped by noise and heat. The people performing these tasks are not merely following simple orders. They are managing a complex process with experience their owners depend on, even while pretending the true intelligence of the plantation resides upstairs in a counting room. A man in linen can claim mastery over sugar from his desk, but he cannot smell the exact moment a kettle turns unless he stands beside it. The danger here is not only machinery, it is fire, boiling syrup, flying sparks, exhaustion, thick air. A slip can throw someone against iron or into scalding liquid. A clumsy move with fuel can send flame where it should not go. Sleep deprivation makes judgment slower. Long harvest nights make that risk worse. Historians still debate how completely planters understood the cumulative toll of these environments on enslaved workers' health, because some records reduce injury to vague remarks and others say almost nothing at all. But the uncertainty lies in paperwork, not in the reality of the room. Heat, smoke, and overwork punish the body whether or not a planter bothers to count the damage honestly. The sugar house has its own hierarchy. The overseer may stride through with authority, but he cannot personally control every stage. Boilers, firemen, feeders, carriers, and cleaners all hold pieces of the process. Some enslaved workers gain limited leverage through skill, though leverage in such a place is fragile and dangerous. A respected boiler might influence the pace of a particular task, or command a little deference within the work crew. At the same time, he may bear more blame if anything fails. Responsibility here is a trap lined with heat. You notice how the building shapes the senses. Light inside is unstable, coming from flames, lanterns, and whatever daylight slips through openings high in the walls. Faces appear red one moment, yellow the next, then disappear into shadow. Sweat shines on temples and collarbones. Smoke softens edges. Steam clouds the far end of the room. The noise is so continuous that quiet begins to seem imaginary, even when a kettle settles for a second. Another part of the building erupts. Grind, clatter, hiss, roar. You almost feel the sound in your teeth. Outside the boiling room, sugar passes toward cooling, curing, and storage. Depending on the plantation's methods and equipment, the thickened mass may be poured into molds or containers where molasses drains away and raw sugar begins to take shape. Barrels wait nearby. Wood creaks as they are rolled or stacked. The smell changes again here, less green, more dense and dark. It is almost festive in another context. Here it seems oppressive, as though sweetness itself has been forced to work too hard. The labour does not end when the syrup leaves the kettles. Vessels must be cleaned, Fires maintained, ash removed, bagasse shifted, floors scraped, equipment repaired, wagons unloaded, accounts recorded. The sugar house is a place where one task bleeds into the next without granting much rest. During the height of the season, night and day blur. Workers nap in fragments or not enough at all. Clothes remain damp from sweat and steam. Hands grow sticky, then raw from washing and lifting. Hair and skin absorb smoke until it feels permanent. There is also the emotional atmosphere of the building, and it's worth pausing there because brutality is not only physical. In the sugar house, mistakes are highly visible. A scorched batch, a stalled roller, a clogged channel, a dropped vessel. Errors threaten profit, so tempers run hot. This can mean sudden punishment, sharp suspicion, or a constant cloud of blame. Workers must monitor not only fire and syrup, but also moods. Who is near breaking point? Who is angry already? Who is looking for someone to fault? Emotional vigilance becomes another kind of labour, invisible in the books and exhausting in the body. And yet, even in this punishing space, human knowledge and feeling persist. One worker reaches for a cloth before another asks. A practiced glance warns someone that the syrup is rising too quickly. Two men shift a load together with perfect timing learned over many nights. An older hand mutters a half-joke about the master loving sugar more than his own soul. It is the kind of joke that passes by in a second and leaves the smallest trace of relief. Not much. Enough. The owner may tour the sugar house with pride, pointing out improved kettles, brickwork, new rollers, a better steam engine, or efficient drainage. He may speak as though the building proves his intelligence and modern spirit. Planters in Louisiana often prided themselves on technical innovation in sugar manufacture, reading agricultural reports, purchasing expensive machinery, and comparing yields with one another. The irony is difficult to miss. Men who considered themselves enlightened because they liked better valves and larger vacuum pans could still treat black labourers as expendable components of the same system. Refinement in equipment did not produce refinement in ethics, quite the opposite. Better technology often intensified the demand to keep human bodies in motion around it. Toward midnight, the sugar house feels almost unreal. Firelight pulses on brick walls. Steam rolls upward and vanishes in rafters blackened by soot. Outside, the fields are dark and quiet by comparison, but inside the building everything keeps churning. Time loses shape. The room exists in a constant present tense. Feed the rollers, skim the froth, stir the syrup, throw in fuel, lift the pan, clean the trough, carry the barrel. People move as though tethered to the machinery by necessity itself. A young worker pauses just long enough to wipe his forearm across his face, leaving a streak of cane, residue and soot. Another crouches to scrape hardened sugar from a rim before it cools too much to remove easily. Near the furnace, the heat is so fierce that your skin prickles instantly, and the worker tending it has the reddened eyes of someone who has spent too many nights staring into flame. His job may be less visible in planter boasting than that of the boiler, but the process collapses without him. Such is plantation labour, essential work done by people denied the right to call their labour their own. A faint draught enters through an opening in the wall and brings the smell of the river for a moment, damp and muddy and strangely fresh compared with the cooked heaviness inside. Then the draught is gone, replaced again by smoke and sweetness. You understand now that the sugar house is not a side building to the plantation story. It is the point where field labour becomes commodity. It is where cane is transformed into the crystals and syrup that travel to market and become wealth. It is also where the human cost becomes impossible to ignore if you are standing close enough to feel the heat. In the early hours, when fatigue has made everyone quieter, the room still refuses to soften. Iron remains hot, syrup still thickens, orders still snap out when needed. The building keeps asking for steadiness from people whose hands tremble from exhaustion. That is the grim genius of the sugar plantation. It binds survival to precision, then denies rest to those expected to be precise. You stand in the doorway at last and look back. Through the smoke and flicker, workers bend and lift, skim and haul, their faces set in concentration beneath the weight of the night. Outside, the stars continue overhead as if the world were calm. Inside, the true work of Louisiana sugar thunders on. The polished bowls and silver tongs of distant dining rooms begin here, in this furnace of labour, where black Americans are forced to turn stalk and juice into profit, while surrounded by heat so intense it seems to press memory into the walls. The sugar house glows behind you, bright, loud, dangerous, and hungry for more. Night on the plantation begins with a strange split in the air. The fields quiet down, the mill noise softens with distance, and the darkness starts to gather around the cabins like warm water. Yet nothing about the evening feels fully restful. Smoke hangs low over the quarters, frogs pulse from the ditches, insects thrum so steadily that the sound becomes part of your breathing. The ground still holds the day's heat, and the smell of cane lingers everywhere, mixed now with ash, cooking fat, damp wood, and the faint sourness of sweat dried into clothes that have no time to become truly clean. This is the part of plantation life that outsiders rarely cared to see clearly. A planter might notice the cabins from a distance, count them, perhaps remark on their arrangement, then turn back toward the house where candles burn brighter and supper appears on polished plates. But the cabins are where the enslaved world gathers itself at the end of the day. Here hunger is managed, wounds are examined, children are soothed, gossip travels, songs survive, and tenderness slips through spaces too small for comfort. The quarters do not erase the violence of the plantation, they sit inside it. Still, they are among the few places where people can try, however imperfectly, to be more than labour. You walk between the cabins slowly. Some are made of rough timber, some chinked against draught with mud and scraps, some sturdier than others depending on the wealth and habits of the owner. Most are crowded. Many hold several people in a space that would insult even a modest standard of comfort. The walls are close, the floors may be dirt or rough planks. A fireplace, if there is one, becomes the centre of everything. The light from it is unsteady and low, staining the walls orange and brown. Shadows tremble across bed ticks stuffed with moss, straw, or whatever filler could be found. A stool, a box, a shelf, a gourd, a kettle, a blanket. Each object matters because there are so few to spare. You smell supper before you see it. Cornmeal mush, salt pork, beans, greens if a garden has yielded enough, sometimes fish from nearby water, sometimes sweet potatoes, sometimes not enough of anything to fill a day's hunger. Plantation rations varied, but cornmeal and pork formed a common backbone in many enslaved diets across the South, and Louisiana was no exception. Enslaved families often supplemented those rations with garden crops, small livestock, fishing, hunting, or gathering when they could manage it. That is a mainstream historical fact, and it matters because official rations alone rarely provided enough variety or enough control. Cooking for yourself under enslavement was never a sign of leisure. It was survival built out of scraps. Inside one cabin, a woman stirs a pot while a child half asleep leans against her leg. The child smells of smoke and warm skin. A younger boy sits near the door, picking at a splinter in the threshold with quiet concentration. Perhaps because he is tired. Perhaps because small tasks help keep worry at bay. A man enters stooping under the low frame, shoulders coated in a fine crust of dried cane and dust. He sits carefully at first, as though his back is no longer certain how to bend. The room carries many kinds of touch, rough fabric against sore skin, heat from the fire on your shins, a wooden bowl warm in the hand, a baby's fingers catching at a sleeve, a heel pressed into packed earth after hours of standing. Meals can be the closest thing to a family ceremony the plantation allows. Not grand, not leisurely, but deeply important. People eat quickly, often because they are so tired that slowness becomes impossible. Yet even in haste there is order. The oldest may be served first in one cabin, the smallest first in another, depending on who is sick, who worked hardest, who needs coaxing to eat, who still has enough strength to wait. Stories can begin over food, or arguments, or simple silence. Sometimes silence is its own form of care. The cabins also hold the sounds of repair. A woman mends a shirt by firelight. A man reshapes a handle or patches a basket. Someone braids hair. Someone else oils a shoe if there is any oil to spare. Everyday maintenance goes on because clothing, tools, and bodies all wear down quickly under plantation labour. These are intimate acts, but they are practical too. A torn garment means more discomfort in the field. Uncombed hair can become a misery under heat and insects. A loose handle can worsen a hard day. Care here is never abstract. A curious little detail of cabin life appears in the use of chimney corners and hearth ash. Ash could be saved for practical purposes such as scrubbing, deodorizing, preserving certain foods, or even improvised cleaning. The hearth was not only for warmth and cooking, it was part workshop, part pharmacy, part gathering place, part fragile defense against darkness. One patch of firelight had to do a great many jobs. In another cabin, music begins very softly, perhaps no instrument at all, just a hum first, then a second voice, then a rhythm tapped with fingers on a knee or floorboard. Music in the quarters can be worship, memory, grief, teasing, flirtation, storytelling, or simple relief. It does not need permission to matter. The sound here is low because everyone knows who might be listening, but low sound can carry deeply. A tune rocks a baby. A call and response slips through a doorway. Someone laughs once, dry and tired, when a lyric lands just right. It is not the laughter of ease. It is the laughter of people refusing to surrender the full range of feeling. You begin to notice how many relationships have to be actively maintained at night because daytime allows so little of it. Parents speak to children they barely saw in daylight. Partners exchange the details of the day in fragments. Friends compare rumours about an overseer, a sale, a sickness, a birth. Elderly people pass on practical knowledge. Which herb helps a stomach turned by bad food? Which ditch path stays driest after rain? Which white man talks too smoothly to be trusted? Advice on a plantation travels through ordinary conversation. An ordinary conversation can be precious. Children drift through this world with a strange mixture of sleepiness and alertness. They nod off by the fire, then jerk awake when adults speak sharply. They play with scraps, pebbles, sticks, cloth dolls, carved bits of wood, or whatever imagination can transform. Historians know that children under slavery worked early and learned fear early, but they also played, copied adult rhythms, joked, sulked, and sought comfort exactly because they were children. A little girl may trace patterns in dust with her toe while listening to voices she only partly understands. A boy might make a toy cart from odds and ends, then push it solemnly across the floor as if work itself has entered play. Their world is constrained, but not empty. The emotional weather in the cabins shifts from doorway to doorway. One room carries the heaviness of illness. Someone coughs under a blanket, skin hot, breathing shallow. Another room holds the sharp current of an argument, perhaps over food, perhaps jealousy, perhaps frustration too large to name plainly. In another, there is quiet peace for a few minutes, the kind created when a baby finally sleeps and no one has the energy to disturb the fragile calm. Plantation life compresses everything: love, resentment, fatigue, longing, embarrassment, fear. Night does not solve those things. It simply gives them a room. Scholars still disagree over how much privacy enslaved families could claim within different plantation layouts, because cabin structures, surveillance patterns, and planter habits varied widely. Some estates imposed tight control even after dark. Others allowed a little more breathing room, whether from neglect, distance, or practical limits. The uncertainty matters because privacy itself was unevenly distributed, and for enslaved people it could never be assumed. Even the most personal conversation took place under the shadow of somebody else's legal power. You step outside again, and the sky above the quarters is full of stars. The damp night air presses close around your neck and wrists. Fireflies drift near the fence line. Somewhere a woman calls a child indoors by name. That name carries softly over the cabins and settles into the night with a sweetness no market ledger could hold. Naming matters. Nicknames matter too. They can protect, affectionately mock, encode memory, or keep family lines alive in ways the planter neither sees nor values. A person listed as property on paper may be called by another name at home, and that home name can carry the warmth of belonging. Near one cabin, a small garden patch catches the moonlight. Rows are modest but carefully kept. Greens, beans, herbs, perhaps onions, perhaps a little corn. Gardens gave many enslaved people a measure of nutrition, and a small sphere of skill and decision-making, though never outside the larger violence of plantation control. The soil smells damp and mineral-rich. A hand brushes basil or mint, releasing a fresh scent into the thick air. That brief smell cuts through smoke like a memory of another life. Older women are often central figures in the nighttime world of the quarters. They may not be the most visible in field records, but in the cabins they hold together astonishing amounts of knowledge: midwifery, herbal treatment, childcare, storytelling, family disputes, spiritual language, timing, manners, memory. They know which baby is teething, which teenager is lying badly, which man is drinking too much when he can get it, which young mother has not eaten enough. Their authority may be informal, but it can be deep. Plantation power does not erase internal community structures. It only distorts and pressures them. The smell of healing remedies floats from one doorway. Camphor, perhaps, or herbs steeped into bitter liquid, or poultices prepared for swollen joints and fevered skin. Medical care under slavery was often inadequate, exploitative, or indifferent. That is a blunt fact. Owners usually valued treatment according to labor needs and cost. As a result, enslaved communities relied heavily on their own traditions of healing when they could. These remedies were practical, inherited, adaptive, and sometimes remarkably effective. They were also part of a wider effort to preserve life where the system expected people to endure more than anybody should. You hear prayer in another cabin. Not loud church prayer, not polished, just a low voice, then another. It might be Christian language shaped by the Bible, or it might carry older rhythms beneath Christian words. Because spiritual life in the quarters could be layered and creative. Knees rest on rough boards, hands fold, eyes close. Someone asks for protection, someone asks for strength, someone gives thanks for making it through the day at all. The prayer feels intimate, but it is also political in a quiet way. To pray as a person before God is to reject the plantation's claim that you are only property. Outside the larger house, candles glow steadily behind curtains. Supper there has different smells: butter, coffee, wine perhaps, softer bread, better meat. You do not need to enter to know the contrast. The same plantation contains both meals, both nights does both worlds. One is built on comfort protected by law, the other is built on endurance denied justice by law. The distance between the buildings may be short. The moral distance is immense. As the night deepens, fatigue begins to settle over the quarters like another blanket. Voices lower. Babies give in to sleep. Fires shrink into red beds of coal. A man stretches out slowly, wincing as cramped muscles protest. A woman lies awake a little longer, staring at the roof line while insects rattle outside. Perhaps she counts what food remains. Perhaps she thinks of a child sold away years earlier. Perhaps she's simply too tired to shape thought into words. Weariness has many textures. Some of them are quiet enough to be mistaken for peace, and yet the cabins are not defeated spaces. They are pressured spaces, improvised spaces, loving spaces, frustrated spaces, hungry spaces. They contain discipline and laughter, tenderness and sharpness, prayer and gossip, all pressed together under conditions no one chose. In the dark, people reclaim pieces of themselves through the oldest means possible, feeding one another, naming one another, touching a shoulder, braiding hair, telling a story, singing half a verse, saving seeds, remembering a recipe, warning a friend, rocking a child whose breathing finally grows even in the smoky warmth. The plantation would like the day to define everything. It would like labor to be the only truth. But when the fire burns low and the cabins settle into their murmuring night, another truth becomes visible. Black life on a Louisiana sugar plantation in 1835 is not only the work assigned by white owners, it is also the life built after dark in rooms too small, with food too plain, with privacy too thin, and with love still somehow present. Not easy love, not sentimental love, hard-used love, tired love, determined love, the kind that survives because it must. Near midnight, the last quiet sounds drift across the quarters. A cough, a cradle creak, the brush of bare feet on a floorboard. Someone outside tosses water on embers, and steam rises with a brief hiss into the dark. Then the cabins go almost still. Above them, the stars remain bright and unconcerned. Around them, the cane waits in the fields. Inside them, people sleep lightly or not enough, holding on to whatever warmth, memory, and closeness the night has allowed before the next demand comes calling through the dark. You begin to understand the plantation more clearly when you stop looking only at labour and start looking at control. Work does not happen here by accident, and it does not continue simply because cane grows well in Louisiana soil. It is maintained by a system of watching, threatening, measuring, punishing, and reminding. The sugar plantation in 1835 is not merely a workplace built on slavery. It is a place designed to make slavery feel present in every hour, whether a white authority figure is standing directly in front of you or not. Morning makes that plain almost at once. The first sounds of the day do more than wake people. They establish power. A horn, a bell, a knock, a shouted order from outside a cabin wall. Rise, move, appear. The body is summoned before the mind has fully returned from sleep. There is something psychologically shrewd in that. The plantation wants to seize the first moment of the day and mark it as belonging to someone else. Feet hit the floor, hands grope for clothing in dim light. A child stirs. A woman hushes him quickly, not because tenderness is absent, but because delay is dangerous. Even the few minutes before dawn are saturated with command. The white master is often not the loudest voice in this system. He may be physically absent for much of the day, occupied with books, visitors, field inspection, or the pleasant fiction that he is a gentleman rather than a man living from stolen labour. But the plantation still carries his will. That will flows through overseers, drivers, foremen, rules, routines, and punishments. On large Louisiana sugar plantations, the owner commonly relied on an overseer to manage daily labour, discipline, and output. This is a basic historical fact. The overseer represented the owner's demands in immediate form, often with a harshness sharpened by his own need to prove himself useful. If the master preferred polished authority, the overseer often supplied rougher edges. You see him on horseback at the field margin, posture upright, eyes scanning rows. He knows how to watch several things at once. Pace of cutting, use of tools, signs of fatigue, signs of avoidance, who talks too much, who drifts behind, who seems distracted. His power lies not only in punishment, but in unpredictability. He may shout or remain quiet. He may punish one person publicly and save another for later. He may ride slowly behind a work gang until the silence itself becomes oppressive. Surveillance does not need to be constant in order to be effective. It only needs to be possible often enough that people feel it under their skin. Then there is the driver. Drivers occupied a difficult and painful place in plantation hierarchy. Usually enslaved men chosen or forced into supervisory roles over work gangs. They carried orders downward and absorbed pressure from above. Some were brutal in their own right. Some used what little room they had to soften demands when they could. Many likely shifted between those modes according to circumstance, survival, and personal temperament. Historians still debate the degree of agency drivers could exercise on different plantations, because records flatten them into function and rarely capture the full moral complexity of their position. What is certain is that planters used drivers as part of the machinery of control, often exploiting the unbearable tension of asking an enslaved person to help enforce the labour of other enslaved people. You watch a driver move along a row on foot, switch in hand, shoulders tight. His eyes are not relaxed. They cannot be. He must read both directions at once. The workers before him, the overseer behind him, a missed stalk, a lagging pace, a whispered exchange. All of it could become his problem if he does not act. Fear flows through him as well. The plantation arranges itself so that terror descends in layers, each layer pressing on the one below. A master fears debt and failed harvest. An overseer fears dismissal or the master's anger. A driver fears punishment and humiliation. Field hands fear all of them. The structure does not make cruelty accidental. It distributes it. A strange and revealing detail from plantation life appears in the use of timekeeping. Some plantations relied not only on bells or horns, but on carefully observed work rhythms that became internal clocks for everyone involved. People learned to judge how late it must be by the slant of light, the number of wagon trips, or the point when a supervisor usually appeared. Time itself became a disciplinary tool, and the body learned it whether it wished to or not. Fear on the plantation is rarely theatrical. It does not need to be. Its power often lies in repetition and routine. A raised voice at the same hour, the sight of a whip carried openly, the knowledge that permission is required to travel, to visit, to gather, to stop, to rest, to speak certain thoughts aloud. Rules do not have to be read from a printed list to be understood. People learn them through consequences. They learn who can be approached and who must be avoided. They learn when to lower their eyes and when to appear attentive without seeming insolent. They learn how to make the face blank enough to be safe. That face is work too. The master's household extends this regime in more polished ways. In the big house, enslaved domestic workers face a different style of surveillance, often closer and more intimate. A mistress may monitor posture, language, clothing, speed, and expression with exquisite irritation. A misplaced dish, a delayed answer, a glance judged disrespectful, all can carry penalties. Here the fear is tied to proximity. Every movement may be seen, every silence may be interpreted. A servant pouring coffee has to manage hot liquid, heavy trays, and the moods of people who consider even small mistakes an offence against their comfort, outside, in the yard or field. Fear has a broader reach. Punishment may be public because public punishment teaches efficiently. A body displayed in pain communicates faster than any lecture on discipline. Enslavers understood this perfectly well. Punishment on plantations across the South included whipping, confinement, shackling, deprivation, and other forms of violence meant to enforce labour and submission. Louisiana's sugar plantations were fully part of that world. That is not a speculative point. The exact frequency and severity varied from estate to estate, but coercion was fundamental, not exceptional. You do not need to describe every blow to understand its power. Often the greater force lies in anticipation. People know what can happen. They know what has happened. They know where punishment takes place and what it sounds like. A hush falls over the quarters when someone is taken out. Children go quiet because adults do. Even those not directly involved feel the discipline settle over the air. A whip can strike one back and land in 20 minds. The plantation also governs through permission. Permission to marry in any meaningful communal sense, though the law offered enslaved people no secure recognition. Permission to visit a spouse on another plantation. Permission to keep certain goods. Permission to attend worship under supervision. Permission to leave the estate with a pass. Permission to sell produce from a garden or to keep fowl. These permissions can be granted, withheld, or revoked, and that makes them instruments of control. A person who depends on permission for one precious visit carries the master's power into even the most intimate corners of life. You notice how fear alters the body. Voices become careful. Shoulders tighten when hoofbeats approach. Hands move faster at the edge of exhaustion because someone important is watching. Laughter cuts off suddenly when a white face appears. Children study adult expressions and learn caution young. Fear lives in posture, breath, and timing. It can make a person glance over one shoulder before answering a simple question. It can make sleep shallow because the nervous system never fully believes the danger is past, and yet fear never achieves complete obedience. That is one of the system's great frustrations. It can coerce labour. It can force silence in certain moments. It can produce outward compliance, but it cannot eliminate thought. People still judge their masters. They still rank overseers according to cruelty, vanity, weakness, or predictability. They still trade information. They still make decisions under pressure. A person may bow their head and say little, while privately calculating how to preserve strength, hide resentment, protect a child, or exploit a crack in the rules. Some masters prefer to imagine themselves paternal and restrained, especially when writing letters or speaking to guests. They like to describe discipline as unfortunate but necessary, as though the plantation were a school for unruly children rather than a profit-making regime sustained by violence. The self-pity of slaveholders can be almost comic if it were not so ugly. They complained of the burdens of management while owning human beings. They lamented discipline as a hardship for themselves. Nothing reveals moral confusion quite like a man who thinks being forced to terrorize the people he owns is evidence of his own suffering. The architecture of the plantation supports this system of fear. The big house may sit where approaches are visible. Yards remain open enough to watch movement. Quarters may be arranged in lines that permit inspection. Work sites cluster under easy supervision during busy seasons. Paths matter. Gates matter. Distance matters. Even dogs can matter. Control is built into space as much as into law. A plantation is an environment arranged for unequal visibility. Some people are seen too much. Others hide their intentions because they must. Night does not erase the system. It merely changes its texture. Darkness offers a little cover, but it also increases anxiety, patrols, surprise inspections, the fear of being found absent, the danger of being accused of plotting. In Louisiana, enslaved movement after dark was often tightly restricted, especially after earlier uprisings in the region had frightened the planter class. White memory of revolt lingered long after specific events passed, and that memory helped justify even harsher surveillance. Enslavers feared rebellion because they knew exactly how much cruelty their world rested upon. Oppressors are often excellent judges of the hatred they inspire. There is scholarly uncertainty about how uniformly fear was experienced across different plantations, because personality, scale, geography, and labour demands all affected daily life. Some masters delegated almost everything to harsh overseers. Others intervened more personally. Some plantations were notorious for extreme discipline. Others relied more on routine, incentive, or manipulation while keeping violence ready in reserve. But these differences should not be mistaken for moral categories of kinder and crueler slavery, as though the system itself could become humane through style. Forced labour, family vulnerability, sale, and legal domination remained the constant frame. You stand near the quarters late in the evening and sense how people listen, not casually, actively. Hoofbeats on the road, a gate latch, footsteps in the yard, the clink of harness. Listening becomes its own survival skill. A mother pauses mid-sentence because she heard someone near the door. A man lowers his voice without looking up. A boy glances toward the path, then back to the floor. No one needs to announce why. The possibility of interruption is enough. At the same time, fear is never the only feeling in the room. That matters. Too many descriptions of slavery make it sound as though terror flattened all other human states, and that is not true. People can be afraid and affectionate, afraid and angry, afraid and funny, all in the same hour. The plantation tries to dominate emotion, but life keeps overflowing its categories. A woman mocks an overseer's walk once he is out of earshot, and the room warms with dangerous laughter. An older man offers advice to a younger one on how to endure a driver's temper without surrendering your pride entirely. Such moments do not dissolve fear, they complicate it. The driver himself may sit later with a face the plantation never sees in daylight. A man who gave hard orders in the field may now eat in silence, sick with the position he occupies or hardened by long necessity. Perhaps both. His children still know him as father. His neighbours still know he carries authority, others do not. The contradictions remain. Plantation hierarchy enters households and relationships, creating tensions that no simple moral labelling can tidy up. Toward dawn, when darkness is thinnest and the world is almost quiet, fear can feel most intimate. It is no longer the public fear of a raised whip or shouted command. It is the private fear that sleeps beside you. Will there be punishment today? Will someone be sold? Will the overseer notice weakness? Will the child's fever worsen? Will a husband receive a pass to visit? Will a rumour prove true? These questions do not march in formation. They drift through the mind in fragments, and that drifting may be more exhausting than a single sharp terror. Then the signal comes again. Rise, move, begin. The plantation renews itself each morning through ritualized power, making domination feel ordinary by repeating it until repetition itself becomes part of the structure. Masters, overseers, drivers, rules, passes, inspections, punishments, permissions. None of these are side details. They are the framework that makes sugar possible. Without fear, the labour would not hold. Without surveillance, the deadlines would fail. Without constant reminders of unequal power, the whole arrangement would reveal how unstable it really is. And still, within that framework, people remain larger than the role fear assigns them. The master may imagine himself the sun around which the plantation turns, but he depends every day on the labour, attention, memory, and involuntary cooperation of the very people he seeks to dominate. That dependence is his hidden weakness. Fear can discipline a field for a season. It cannot produce legitimacy. It cannot make ownership just. It cannot make the watched believe the watcher is right. It can only keep proving, over and over, how much force is required to maintain a world that would otherwise collapse under the weight of its own cruelty. You see the plantation differently when you look through the lives of women and children. The cane fields are still there. The mill still growls. The overseer still rides the margins of the day, but the whole place begins to reveal another layer of labour, one that holds the plantation together while also carrying the most intimate forms of strain. Women are expected to work hard enough for the master's profit, nurture enough for the community's survival, endure enough for everybody's convenience, and remain visible only when useful. Children are expected to grow, obey, learn labour, absorb fear, and somehow still remain children in a world that gives them very little room for childhood. Morning starts early for them, just as it does for everyone else, but the demands stack differently. A mother wakes before dawn because she must wake for herself and for someone smaller. She gropes in half-dark for clothing, ties a headscarf, checks the child beside her, stirs embers if any warmth remains, and calculates the impossible arithmetic of time. How to feed a little one, how to prepare for field work, how to leave instructions with an older girl, an elderly woman, or whoever can watch the smallest children while others labour. The cabin air smells of smoke, sour milk, damp cloth, and sleep. Outside, the horn or shouted summons breaks whatever peace the night allowed. There is no graceful transition from home to labour. The plantation tears through the doorway before daylight is fully formed. Enslaved women on Louisiana sugar plantations performed arduous agricultural labour in large numbers. That is a basic historical fact, and it matters because popular fantasy has long tried to soften female labour under slavery into something gentler than it often was. In reality, women cut cane, hoed fields, planted, weeded, hauled, fed livestock, cooked for labour gangs, washed clothes, cared for children, and worked in domestic service or specialised tasks according to the plantation's needs. Pregnancy did not guarantee meaningful relief. Motherhood did not remove labour demands. A woman could be valued for field strength and for childbearing at the same time, which reveals the plantation's moral logic with hideous clarity. It wanted productivity in every sense the market could count. You watch women move into the field carrying tools and fatigue together. Their skirts or dresses are pinned or tucked for motion, head wraps hold hair back against heat, hands already rough from washing, chopping, lifting, and carrying close around hoe handles or cane knives. Some women work beside husbands or kin, others work among unrelated gangs, linked more by shared condition than by family bond. Their movements are practiced, efficient, not because the work is easy, but because every ounce of wasted energy will be punished by the body later. The plantation depends on women's labour twice over, once in the field and again in the spaces that keep life from collapsing after the field. Cooking, mending, nursing the sick, birthing children, comforting the frightened, burying the dead in some cases, and passing on practical knowledge all fall heavily upon them. This extra labour is rarely recorded with the same interest planters give to sugar yield, because systems of domination often hide the work that makes survival possible. A woman might spend the day in a cane row and the evening over a boiling pot, then stay awake with a feverish child long after her own back has begun to cramp. A small, curious detail appears in plantation clothing practices. Head wraps worn by enslaved women were practical protection against sun, sweat, and field debris, but they could also become sites of personal style, regional habit, and subtle expression in a world where clothing choices were heavily constrained. Fabric folded one way rather than another may look small to an outsider, yet small choices often carry the weight of selfhood when larger choices are denied. Children live inside this same system, but their days unfold in uneven stages depending on age and the habits of the plantation. The smallest may remain near cabins under the eye of older women, elderly workers, or girls not yet assigned full field tasks. You hear babies fussing in the morning warmth, toddlers whining with hunger or boredom, a child being scolded for wandering too near the road. Dust clings to bare ankles, noses run, little hands grip skirts. The smell of child life, warm skin, milk, ash, dirt, sweetness from crushed cane stuck to a finger, persists even amid the harsher odours of labour and smoke. Older children are drawn steadily into the work world. A boy may begin by carrying water, chasing poultry, gathering kindling, or keeping birds from newly planted rows. A girl may mind infants, sweep yards, shell peas, help with washing, or fetch items from house to quarters and back again. These small tasks are not innocent apprenticeships. They are the first steps in learning that the plantation expects useful motion from every body it owns. Over time, the tasks harden. More carrying, more field time, more pressure, more supervision. Childhood narrows under labour's advance, and yet children are never only future workers. They remain immediate human beings. They invent games with stones, rags, sticks, scraps of wire, carved bits of wood, and the astonishing elasticity of imagination. They imitate adults because children everywhere do, but on a plantation those imitations can feel painful. A toy wagon pulled through dust, a little girl rocking a cornhusk doll while mimicking a tired mother's voice, a boy swinging a reed like a hoe handle. Play and labour sit dangerously close together here. One slips into the other without warning. Women often act as the first teachers of survival, not only mothers, though mothers carry much of it. Grandmothers, aunts by blood, aunts by affection. Older sisters, unrelated women who become anchors to children needing them. They teach how to move carefully near white authority, how to keep a younger child quiet when quiet matters, how to read a face for danger, how to wash a cut, how to keep a little cornmeal from spilling, how to carry a baby on the hip while keeping one hand free. Survival is taught in countless tiny lessons, and most of them pass without formal naming. The emotional burden can be immense. A mother in the field may spend hours thinking about the child left in another pair of hands. Is he drinking enough water? Has the fever broken? Did the older girl remember to keep him out of the sun? Fear does not wait politely until work is done. It travels with her into the row. She cuts cane while imagining cabin shadows. A child's cough, a small face hot against a blanket. The body performs labour while the mind remains divided. There is scholarly uncertainty about how much fertility and childbirth on Louisiana sugar plantations were shaped by planters' direct pronatalist strategies versus broader demographic pressure and coercive sexual exploitation. Historians continue to debate the balance of those forces in particular estates because records vary. Language is evasive, and enslaved women's own voices survive unevenly. What is beyond doubt is that enslaved women bore reproductive burdens under conditions they did not control, and plantation owners often treated those burdens as economic matters rather than human ones. You watch a pregnant woman at work and understand something cold about the system. The plantation may adjust her task for a time, or it may not. It may pretend concern because a future child has market value, or it may demand nearly the same output until the body itself forces recognition. She bends carefully. One hand briefly presses her lower back. No one in authority sees that motion as important unless it threatens productivity. The tenderness of the gesture belongs to her alone, and perhaps to the women around her who notice without comment because they already understand. Birth enters the plantation as both miracle and calculation. For the family or community, a child may mean joy, fear, continuity, grief, hope, and fierce attachment all at once. For the owner, a birth may also appear in a ledger as increase. Very few facts better reveal the obscenity of slavery than that simple contrast. The same infant can be held with tears by a mother and assessed as future labour by a man who owns the cabin she sleeps in. White planters could speak of children sentimentally while still preparing them for a lifetime of forced work. It takes a remarkable discipline of hypocrisy. Children also witness more than adults sometimes realise. They notice tension in voices. They know which overseer is loudest. They recognise the sound of a parent's step returning from the field. They understand hunger long before they can explain it. A child may not grasp the full legal structure of slavery, but he knows that white men can make adults afraid. She knows that some names are spoken softly and some only in secret. He knows when his mother's face changes because she has heard bad news. Women hold memory in ways the plantation cannot fully catalogue. Recipes adapted from older places. Names of kin sold away. Birth stories. Songs with hidden turns of meaning. Remedies for teething. Fever. Stomach pain. The best way to clean a wound with little at hand. The right leaves for a tea. The warning never to trust certain promises. This memory work is not decorative. It is essential. It keeps people linked to one another and to a past the plantation would prefer to erase. By afternoon, the day's exhaustion settles heavily over everyone. But women's labour often remains visibly split. A field hand returns to the quarters not into rest, but into a second shift of care. A domestic worker leaves the big house carrying the emotional residue of white family moods, then enters her own cabin where a child is waiting to be washed, fed, or comforted. A nursing mother may have spent the day away from her infant, breasts aching, mind distracted, then returned to feed the child while still needing to prepare the evening meal. Touch here matters deeply. A child's hot forehead under a cool hand, a baby at the breast, fingers moving through tangled hair. These ordinary gestures become acts of restoration in a world built on extraction. Some children lose childhood in sharper ways through sale, sickness, punishment, or the death of parents. An older sister becomes half-mother before she's fully grown. A boy learns to quiet younger siblings because no adult can always be present. A child sleeps with one shoe on because she does not trust the night to remain calm. These adaptations do not make children less vulnerable. They simply show how fast vulnerability is trained into competence under pressure. Girls face particular risks because they are drawn early into domestic and caregiving labour, while also growing up under the gaze of white authority. Their usefulness becomes visible in multiple directions at once. A capable girl can be praised one moment and overburdened the next. Her time is rarely her own. Even her growing body can become a site of fear for the women around her, who understand dangers she may only partly see. Much of this knowledge is transmitted quietly, in warnings without explanation, in protective watchfulness, in the habit of never letting a girl wander too far alone if it can be helped. Boys, meanwhile, are watched for signs of future labour capacity and future resistance. A strong boy may be noted approvingly by those who intend to work him hard soon enough. A defiant one may draw early punishment. Yet boys also remain boys. They race when no one is looking. They boast. They sulk. They cry in the dark and wipe their faces before morning. The plantation wants categories. Real children keep slipping out of them. As dust settles, women gather the day back together in fragments. Food is prepared, clothes are checked, wounds are cleaned, hair is braided, lessons are repeated. Do not say that name outside. Stay near the cabin. Watch your brother. Keep away from the road. Bring the pail back full. Such instructions sound simple, but they build a shield as best they can. Survival on a sugar plantation depends not only on strength in the field, but on this nightly reconstruction of order within disorder. You begin to feel the depth of women's endurance not as an abstract virtue, but as a physical rhythm. The steady rocking of a child after 12 hours on sore feet, the patient untangling of hair with tired fingers, the bending over a pot when the lower back already burns from work, the whispered consolation offered even when the speaker herself is near empty. Endurance here is not saintly. Sometimes it comes with irritation, sharp words, or tears. That too is human. Care given under pressure does not always look gentle. Sometimes it looks like urgency, sometimes like sternness, sometimes like a woman too tired to smile but still making sure a child eats. Late at night, when the cabins have gone quieter and only the smallest children still stir, the plantation appears almost peaceful from a distance. The stars are bright. Cane leaves rustle in a softer wind. Smoke thins upward from the last fires. But inside the cabins, women still turn over worries in the dark. Will the child's cough worsen? Will the overseer move her boy into heavier work? Will there be enough meal by week's end? Will another pregnancy come before the body has recovered from the last? These thoughts do not announce themselves grandly. They press close and persistent, like heat that never entirely leaves the air. The plantation counts women and children according to labour, cost, and future value. The people within it know better. They know who sings a baby to sleep with a certain low humming note, who can stop a nosebleed, who tells the funniest story, which child scares easily in thunder, which girl carries water without spilling much, which boy still misses a father sold away years ago. These details never enter the ledgers, yet they are the substance of life. And so, under the long pressure of Louisiana sugar, women and children keep shaping survival from whatever is left to them. They hold memory, carry labour, create routine, absorb fear, and still make room for growth where almost no room exists. The plantation demands usefulness. They answer with humanity as well, in a place that tries to turn everybody into output. That humanity becomes one of the most stubborn forms of endurance the system can never fully own. You start to notice resistance when you stop expecting it to look dramatic all the time. The plantation encourages outsiders to imagine only two possibilities: total obedience or open rebellion. That is convenient for the people in power because it makes everything in between disappear. But life under slavery is lived mostly in that middle space, where resistance can be quiet, practical, spiritual, sly, stubborn, and woven so tightly into ordinary behaviour that only the people involved understand its full meaning. On a Louisiana sugar plantation in 1835, resistance begins at the level of the body. You see it in how someone protects a little strength, instead of giving every last ounce to the field. You hear it in a slowed answer that sounds respectful enough to pass, but carries its own edge. You feel it in the shared pause before a work gang moves, the tiny moment in which people reassert the fact that they are not tools. However much the plantation wants them to behave like tools, these gestures are small, but small does not mean weak. In a world that tries to occupy every hour, even a sliver of unowned time has meaning. Faith is one of the strongest places where this resistance lives. At night, voices gather low in a cabin, near a tree line, or in some patch of dark where white supervision thins for a little while. The prayers may use Christian language, because the Bible has reached these plantations through white preaching, black preaching, personal reading where possible, and oral retelling. But the emotional shape of the worship is not simply copied from the Master's church. It is reworked, deepened, claimed. Biblical stories of bondage and deliverance carry obvious power here. Moses means something different when you're enslaved. Pharaoh does too. A line about crossing water, walking through wilderness, or being seen by God in affliction can land with a force no planter can fully control. Enslaved black people throughout the South created rich spiritual lives that blended Christian belief with older African continuities, local practice, and lived experience. That is a mainstream historical fact. Louisiana adds its own layers through its French, Spanish, African, and Creole cultural currents. The exact balance varied from place to place, but the essential point remains. Worship was not merely something done to the enslaved by missionaries or masters. It was something they reshaped into community, comfort, and sometimes quiet defiance. You can hear that reshaping in the sound of a prayer meeting. No church organ, no polished pews, just breath, hum, whisper, and the rise of a voice steady enough to gather others around it. Someone begins with a line of scripture remembered from hearing rather than reading. Someone else answers with a phrase that is half prayer, half testimony. Feet shift softly on earth or rough boards. A hand lands on a shoulder. The room smells of smoke, damp wood, warm bodies, and maybe mint or camphor from some nearby remedy. Outside, frogs pulse from the wet ground, and the whole night seems to listen. Resistance also lives in memory. A woman tells a child the name of a grandmother from another state. A man repeats the layout of a place he once knew. River bend, church road, stand of pines. As though speaking, it keeps the landscape alive. Names of kin sold away are passed carefully between generations. Recipes survive in altered form because ingredients differ. But the memory of what should be in the pot remains. Hair patterns, songs, stories, burial customs, bits of a language. And warnings are all forms of carried knowledge. Slavery tries to make the present total. Memory keeps refusing. There is a small, curious detail in the way stories can hold coded meaning. Animal tales, trickster stories, and humorous exaggerations may seem like simple entertainment to an outsider. But for listeners inside the quarters, they can carry lessons about power, caution, wit, and survival. A foolish strong creature beaten by a clever weak one is rarely just an amusing image. It can be a map. You notice, too, that resistance sometimes hides inside labour itself. A tool breaks and no one is entirely sure whether it was worn thin by use or helped along by a tired hand. A mule team moves slower than it could. A rule is weeded less thoroughly than the overseer expects. Cane is stacked carelessly enough to create extra trouble later. Nothing so obvious that punishment is guaranteed at once, just enough to bend the pace, waste a little of the master's time, or reclaim a trace of control. Historians often call this day-to-day resistance, and it was widespread in slave societies because it exploited the fact that enslavers needed work, but could not fully trust the workers they coerced. Of course, this sort of resistance carries risk. A person judged lazy, insolent, or destructive can be punished harshly. That danger shapes everything. The point is not that people resisted freely. The point is that resistance persisted despite danger because total submission was never the whole truth of plantation life. Human beings look for room to act, even in the narrower spaces. Then there is flight. Running away from a sugar plantation is difficult. Louisiana's landscape can be beautiful, but it is not friendly to the fugitive body. Swamps, rivers, bayous, insects, heat, patrols, dogs, and unfamiliar roads make escape perilous. Passes are required for movement. White suspicion falls quickly on black people travelling without explanation. Even so, some enslaved people did run, temporarily or for longer stretches. Some hid nearby in woods or marshes and returned after a time. Some tried to reach New Orleans, where the crowded port city offered both danger and a thin chance of disappearance. Some aimed farther still. Flight is resistance in one of its clearest forms because it rejects the master's claim to one's body altogether. There is scholarly uncertainty over how often temporary truancy should be distinguished from longer-term escape in plantation records, because owners frequently described absences in ways that served their own interests. A man gone 2 days might be called a runaway to justify alarm. Another gone longer might be labelled absent in softer terms if the owner wanted to avoid embarrassment. The paperwork blurs categories. Lived experience did not. For the person taking that risk, the difference between hiding overnight and trying never to return could mean everything. You stand near the edge of the quarters and hear someone humming while mending a shirt. The tune is not loud. It does not announce rebellion, yet it carries a steadiness that the plantation has not managed to crush. Music often works this way. Songs can hold sorrow openly, but they can also carry timing, coded feeling, mockery, hope, and communal rhythm. Work songs help regulate labour. Spirituals reframe suffering. Lullabies preserve tenderness. A melody repeated over years can become a private archive. Resistance can also be social. Refusing to let the plantation define all relationships is itself a challenge to the system. People marry informally or spiritually even when the law denies protection. They claim kin through affection and obligation. They raise one another's children. They hide food for the sick. They warn one another about punishments, sales, or unwanted attention. This mutual care is not separate from resistance. It is resistance. Slavery depends on isolation and vulnerability. Community interferes with both. Some acts are sharper. Poisoning has haunted the fears of slave societies for centuries, and Louisiana planters were no exception. Rumours and accusations of poisoning travelled easily, sometimes based on real attempts, sometimes on white paranoia, sometimes on simple illness blamed upon black knowledge. Enslaved people often possessed significant understanding of herbs, roots, and remedies, which could inspire both genuine healing and white anxiety. Historians still argue over how often poisoning actually occurred compared with how often it was imagined by frightened owners. The fear itself matters. It shows how little enslavers trusted the people forced to cook for them, heal them, or move unseen through their domestic spaces. Open rebellion also belonged to Louisiana's memory. The region had already experienced major slave revolt in the early 19th century, and planter society never forgot it. The German Coast Uprising of 1811 cast a long shadow over white fear in Louisiana, leading to stricter surveillance and a deep sense that rebellion was always possible. That fact matters in 1835 because memory of revolt changes how every act of gathering, whispering, travel, or nighttime movement is interpreted. The masterclass knows that beneath the surface discipline of the plantation lies a reservoir of anger. They know because they have built it. Still, resistance does not need to culminate in mass revolt to be real. Sometimes it is inward. A private refusal to accept the owner's language about your worth. A decision to teach a child family names despite the risk of future sale. A choice to keep praying to a God who sees you as human when the law insists otherwise. White authorities could command labour, but they could not fully occupy thought. That inner space matters, though it is hard for records to capture. You watch an elderly woman tend herbs near a cabin and realize that knowledge itself can be rebellious. She knows what soothes fever, what settles a stomach, what eases swelling, what helps a cough. This reduces dependence on plantation medicine and plantation permission. A young man listens closely because he wants to learn. Such lessons preserve more than health. They preserve authority within the community that does not flow from the master's hand. Children absorb resistance in quiet ways too. They learn which stories are told only at night. They hear adults imitate an overseer's voice once he is gone, reducing his authority through laughter. They learn that one truth can be spoken openly and another held inside the family. They understand, even if dimly at first, that official power is not the same thing as moral rightness. This education is subtle, but it shapes how a child grows into adulthood under slavery. The plantation teaches obedience. The community teaches interpretation. As evening deepens, a gathering begins near the cabins. Not large enough to draw too much notice. Just enough people to make the darkness feel companionable. Someone speaks of a dream. Someone else recites a fragment of scripture. A woman sings a line so soft that it barely seems to leave her mouth. Yet others answer it immediately. Call and response forms a little shelter in the air. The sounds are gentle, but the act is profound. They are creating meaning together beyond the plantation's permission. Resistance also includes preserving joy, though joy here is never simple. A joke after a terrible day, dancing feet on hard ground for a minute before exhaustion wins, a flirtation carried through a doorway. The way laughter can move through a crowded cabin and make everyone breathe more easily for a moment. Pleasure under oppression is not frivolous. It is one of the ways people remind themselves they are still alive. Late at night, the plantation seems calm from a distance. The big house rests behind trees. The mill is quieter now. Cane fields rustle in the damp dark. But within the quarters and the minds of those lying awake, another current moves, plans, prayers, names remembered, warnings repeated, tools hidden, songs stored, anger banked, hope protected. This is not the stillness the master imagines. It is the stillness of people who know that surviving to morning is itself a form of contest. When you look closely, you realize the sugar plantation is full of resistance precisely because it is full of people. Not idealized heroes in every moment, not fearless rebels constantly aflame. People, tired, cautious, loving, strategic, wounded, funny, observant people. Some resist with faith, some with memory, some with sabotage, some with flight, some by keeping a child fed and a family line named, some by enduring without surrendering the belief that they are more than property. The plantation can punish, monitor, and command, but it cannot stop the quiet human instinct to push back against what is wrong in cabins, fields, prayer meetings, gardens, and dark edges of the road. That instinct keeps taking shape, again and again, in forms both small and unforgettable. You can follow the sugar out of the plantation if you want to understand the full scale of what is happening. In the field, the suffering is close enough to smell. In the sugar house, it roars in heat and machinery. But once the raw sugar leaves the estate, it enters a wider world that often prefers not to ask difficult questions. Barrels are sealed, accounts are copied, wagons creak toward the river, steamboats take on cargo, merchants make notes in ledgers, bankers consider credit, shippers think about schedules, consumers think about sweetness. The farther the sugar travels, the easier it becomes for those profiting from it to imagine they have clean hands. You stand near the levee at daybreak and watch labour turn into commerce. The river is broad and muscular under the early light, moving with the same indifference it had yesterday and the day before. Flatboats sit low in the water. A steamboat exhales smoke and cinders into the pale sky. Deckhands shout. Lines slap wet wood. Mules strain against harnesses as wagons loaded with hogsheads or barrels edge toward the landing. The sugar is heavy. Everything about this trade is heavy. Heavy cargo, heavy debt, heavy heat, heavy silence around the human cost. The smell here is not only river mud and damp rope, but molasses, tar, animal sweat, tobacco, and coffee drifting from some nearby warehouse or boat galley. The world of exchange has its own perfume. By 1835, Louisiana sugar is a major commercial crop in the United States, and New Orleans is the indispensable port through which much of that wealth flows. That is a central fact of the era. Planters do not grow sugar simply to admire cane in the fields. They grow it because markets reward it. The crop ties rural estates to city merchants, commission houses, insurers, lenders, exporters, and consumers far away. A plantation may seem isolated at night, but financially it is braided into Atlantic commerce and national politics. The cane row and the counting room belong to the same system. A planter's fortune often rests on credit as much as on soil. He borrows to buy land, more labourers, machinery, mules, kettles, brickwork, barrels, perhaps even elegant furniture to make the house look as prosperous as the ledger hopes it will become. Sugar planting in Louisiana required substantial capital investment compared with many other forms of agriculture, because the mills and processing equipment were expensive. That is another well-established fact. A planter, then, may appear lordly on horseback while actually balancing on layers of debt that depend on a successful crop. This does not make him sympathetic. It makes him dangerous. A man who owes money and owns people has every incentive to squeeze harder. You can almost see the logic moving through his mind. Better yield this season means better terms next season. More land under cane means greater output. A new steam engine may increase efficiency. Another skilled boiler may reduce losses. More enslaved hands may allow larger harvests. He thinks in expansion because the system trains him to do so. The problem, if you can call such a monstrous distortion a problem, is that every step toward higher profit is built on greater demands placed on black bodies. Efficiency on his sugar plantation usually means intensified labour somewhere, quicker grinding, longer hours, stricter supervision, more debt transformed into more urgency. New Orleans receives all of this with brisk professionalism. In the city, factors and commission merchants arrange sales, advance credit, charge fees, and move information back and forth between planter and market. Letters fly downriver and upriver full of prices, weather concerns, shipping news, and complaints about delays. Insurance reduces certain risks for cargo, while doing nothing to acknowledge the deeper moral risk of the entire system. Warehouses stack sugar and molasses as though they were merely agricultural outputs, no more ethically charged than sacks of grain. That is one of commerce's oldest tricks. It can make anything look ordinary once it has been packaged correctly. A curious detail from the trade world lies in the material culture around sugar itself. Refined sugar was often handled with specialized tools such as nippers, tongs, bowls, molds, and decorative serving pieces in wealthier households. It could appear as a sign of refinement and hospitality, surrounded by silver and porcelain. There is something grimly revealing in that image. A product born in heat, noise, and coercion arrives at the table dressed for politeness. You move from the levee into a merchant office and find a different sort of plantation atmosphere. The room is cooler, papers are dry and stacked, ink waits in glass bottles. Men in coats discuss quality, shipment, price, and timing with careful voices. They do not need to raise them. Power in a counting room usually speaks softly. A barrel of sugar becomes an entry on a page. A delayed shipment becomes a complaint. A poor yield becomes a number lower than expected. Even when enslaved people appear in these records, they may appear only as capital outlay, insurance concern, or collateral value. The violence has not vanished. It has been translated into accounting language. That language matters because it helps spread responsibility so widely that no one person claims the full moral weight. The planter blames the market. The merchant blames supply and demand. The banker blames the planter's management. The consumer blames distance or ignorance. Yet each benefits from a system that turns forced labour into sweetness and calls the result prosperity. Profit can be very persuasive when people are looking for excuses. The politics of sugar deepen this picture. Louisiana planters sought favourable policies, protective tariffs, and political influence to support the sugar economy against foreign competition. Sugar was never just a local crop. It was tied to debates about national development, trade, and sectional power. Politicians, lobbyists, and newspapers could discuss sugar in terms of production and revenue, while speaking little of the enslaved labour that made the whole arrangement possible. That split between economic language and human reality is not accidental. It is part of how societies normalise injustice. You begin to notice how many people who never step into a cane field still profit from what happens there. The cooper who makes barrels, the shipper who charges for transport, the insurer who underwrites the cargo, the merchant who takes a commission on sale, the manufacturer who supplies plantation machinery, the lawyer who drafts contracts, the banker who extends credit at interest, the shopkeeper who sells imported fabric and tools to plantation households flush from a good season. Wealth spreads outward in concentric circles, and the suffering at the centre becomes easier for distant beneficiaries to ignore. A planter's household itself displays these profits in concrete ways. Better rugs, imported wine, fine china, a piano perhaps, books, lamps, dresses, saddles, window glass, brass hardware, new paint, polished silver, a shaded gallery for evening comfort. None of these objects are neutral in this setting. They represent not merely taste, but extracted labour converted into domestic elegance. The prettiest room on a plantation is never just a room. It is a statement about whose exhaustion has purchased whose ease. The emotional logic of profit is worth lingering over because it shapes how enslavers see the people they own. Once a person becomes central to an investment strategy, empathy becomes inconvenient. A planter may notice an enslaved worker's skill, illness, pregnancy, age, or grief, chiefly through the lens of productivity. Can she still work? Will he recover in time for harvest? Is that child likely to survive? Might this man bring a good price if sold? The habits of commerce leak into perception until human beings are read like assets. That transformation is one of slavery's deepest moral devastations. It does not merely use people, it trains others to look at them wrongly. Historians still argue over the precise profitability of individual Louisiana sugar plantations in certain years because weather, debt, bookkeeping style, and market conditions could vary sharply, and planters often exaggerated success in public while hiding the weakness in private letters. But there is no serious uncertainty about the broader pattern. Sugar could generate large fortunes, and the possibility of those fortunes fueled continued investment in land, machinery, and enslaved labour. The sugar frontier was not maintained out of tradition alone. It was sustained because many white Americans believed the money justified the means. The enslaved knew they were being valued in this way, not always through direct explanation, though sometimes through sale talk or overheard account keeping, more often through lived experience. The pace quickens when prices are good. A skilled worker is praised in the same tone used for a fine mule. A woman's children are discussed with an owner's interest that feels wrong because it is wrong. A man injured at the mill is spoken of as a loss, not a person first. Such moments teach the true grammar of plantation capitalism with brutal clarity. You stand in a city shop where sugar sits in neat cones or refined loaves, pale and orderly compared with the sticky mass that left the plantation. A clerk wraps goods for a customer who may never imagine the boiling house, the sleepless harvest, or the cabin where a mother fed a child after 12 hours in the field. Perhaps the customer does imagine it and pushes the thought away. Societies often consume most easily when the chain of production has been carefully hidden. There is also prestige in sugar. Wealthy households serve it because it signals access, carise, style, and participation in a wider world of taste. Coffee sweetened with Louisiana sugar can seem like a small pleasure. Cakes and preserves appear at gatherings with the glow of abundance. Hospitality itself becomes entangled with slavery. The table says welcome while the plantation says coercion. The contradiction is severe, yet many people of the period managed to live inside it without surrendering their appetite. Humans are remarkably adaptable when comfort is at stake. As afternoon thickens over the city, the docks remain busy, men roll barrels, clerks tally, boat whistles cut across the river. Newspapers may mention crop expectations or export values. Speculation travels fast in such environments. Will the market rise? Will weather damage the next crop? Will tariff policy hold? In these conversations, black Americans on sugar plantations appear only as labour supply, if they appear at all. Their pain has been abstracted into the phrase cost of production. That phrase deserves to sound ugly. It hides too much. Yet the system is not as secure as its ledgers pretend. Debt makes planters vulnerable. Weather can ruin confidence in a single cold snap. Illness can thin a labour force. Machinery breaks. Global prices shift. Political winds change. The entire sugar economy depends on discipline holding where discipline is least legitimate, on markets staying favourable when markets are fickle, and on enslaved people continuing to produce under conditions that invite resistance at every level. Profit gives the system swagger. Fragility haunts it underneath. You return in thought to the plantation and see the path more sharply now. Cane cut by forced hands, juice boiled by exhausted workers, sugar packed into barrels, cargo shipped to New Orleans, sold by merchants, financed by bankers, protected by politicians, consumed by households that enjoy its sweetness and admire its refinement. Every stage adds distance from the field, but not innocence. Distance is not innocence. It is just distance. Even language changes as money increases. The planter speaks of investments. The merchant speaks of returns. The newspaper speaks of production. The household speaks of quality. Only the enslaved community speaks of bodies, children, punishments, hunger, fear, and survival because they are the ones made to live the truth beneath the euphemisms. Their knowledge is immediate. Everyone else can afford abstraction. As evening falls over the river, the light turns amber on the water and then darkens into bronze. The boats continue their work. The city keeps buying and selling. Somewhere upriver, cane waits to be cut again. Somewhere in a cabin, a woman mends a shirt by fading firelight, while the sugar her labour helped create moves farther from her reach. Somewhere at a polished table, a spoon touches crystal, and no one says what made the sweetness possible. That silence is part of the profit too. The wealth of Louisiana sugar in 1835 does not merely rest on black suffering. It is organised through it, expanded by it, and polished until respectable people can pretend they do not see it. The fields, mills, docks, offices, and dining rooms all belong to one chain. A person in one place may claim to know less than a person in another, but the chain remains intact. Human lives are the hidden currency running through it. Some fortunes rise, some debts are paid, some tables are bright with sugar bowls and silver tongs. Because black Americans on those plantations are forced to give more than labour. They are made to give time, health, family security, and the ordinary right to belong to themselves. That is the true price in the ledger, though no merchant writes it down. You arrive at the quietest part of the story, though it is not truly quiet. The plantation never becomes fully silent. Even at night there are frogs in the ditches, insects in the grass, the soft scrape of cane leaves against one another, the distant creak of wood settling after heat, and the occasional restless sound from a cabin where sleep does not come easily. But this final stretch feels quieter because it asks a different question. Not only what was taken, though much was taken, not only what was suffered, though suffering ran deep, it asks what remained, what stayed alive under pressure, what could not be wholly measured, beaten, bought, or boiled down into profit. That question matters because slavery always tried to define black Americans from the outside. The plantation assigned labels: field hand, girl, driver, cook, prime woman, boy, breeding age, valuable mechanic, runaway, troublemaker, good worker, poor prospect. All those labels had one purpose: to reduce a person to usefulness in somebody else's system. But a person is never exhausted by the category forced upon them. That is the first truth worth holding close at the end. The sugar plantation in Louisiana could seize labour, punish resistance, split families, distort time, and crowd life with fear. It still could not fully conquer the inward fact of personhood. You feel that truth most clearly at dusk. The workday has finally loosened its grip. Smoke drifts low over the quarters. Someone hums while stirring a pot. A child leans against an older woman's knee, half asleep. A man repairs a shoe with fingers that have known cane knives and wagon ropes. Two people speak quietly at a doorway, their voices too soft to carry, but their closeness says enough. None of this looks grand. That is precisely the point. What remained unbroken often lived in ordinary gestures: a hand passing a bowl, a braid tied neatly, a story told by memory, a name repeated so it would not disappear. Family, in this world, was both fragile and tenacious. The law did not protect it. Sale could tear it open. Distance could strain it. Owners could ignore it whenever convenience demanded. Yet black families still formed, deepened, adapted, and mourned. Parents taught children. Children attached themselves to adults who were not blood kin but became kin through care. Husbands and wives found ways to honour commitments the law would not recognise. Grandparents, aunties, elders, and neighbours held people together in networks that no auctioneer truly understood. This is a central historical truth of slavery across the American South. Family survived not because the system allowed it, but because enslaved people insisted upon it wherever they could. You can see the evidence in countless little acts: a mother smoothing a blanket over a sleeping child, an older boy walking his sister back from the well, a woman setting aside the better portion of a meal for someone ill, a man carving a toy from scrap wood because a child's delight still matters. Even here, love under slavery was not easy or sheltered. It had to live under threat. Still, it lived. A quirky but revealing detail rests in naming practices. Many enslaved families used formal names, nicknames, day names, kin names, or pet names that shifted depending on company, affection, and safety. A person might be one thing in a ledger, another in the cabin, another in prayer. Those layers of naming quietly protected identity from the flatness of plantation record-keeping. It is a small detail, but deeply human. To name someone lovingly is to refuse reduction. Culture remained too, though not in untouched or museum-like form. Culture under slavery was adaptive. It changed because it had to. It borrowed, preserved, blended, and reshaped. Foodways mixed memory with necessity. Songs carried sorrow and rhythm together. Speech patterns shifted across regions and generations, especially in Louisiana, where African, Creole, French, and Anglo influences met in complicated ways. Hairstyles, gestures, stories, humour, prayer, gardening, herbal knowledge, and child-rearing all became places where continuity survived through change. What remained unbroken was not some frozen original form. It was the ability to keep making meaning from what the world left in your hands. You hear that in music most of all. A hum near the hearth, a call and response in the dark, a tune carried through labour so that rhythm steadies the body. Music can hold grief without collapsing under it. It can also hold teasing, desire, memory, warning, or praise. White listeners sometimes heard only sound. The people singing heard far more. Songs organised feeling. They also organised time, and on a plantation where time was often stolen, that mattered. Faith remained, not as simple submission, but as a form of inner architecture. A person who prays is not merely escaping reality. They may be reordering it. To kneel before God could mean refusing to kneel inwardly before a master. To tell the story of deliverance from bondage could mean teaching a child that the plantation's power is not the highest power in the universe. Enslaved black Americans developed and sustained profound religious lives under impossible conditions, and those spiritual worlds gave language to pain while also preserving hope, dignity, and moral judgment. The master might claim ownership in law. Faith answered that law with a deeper claim. You begin to understand that laughter remained too. Dry laughter. Tired laughter. The kind that slips out when someone imitates an overseer's pompous walk once he is out of sight. The kind that bubbles up over a child's unexpected joke, or the small vanity of a plantation mistress who thinks everyone admires her ribbon choices. Laughter did not mean the burden was light. It meant the burden had not erased wit. Humour is one of the oldest proofs that a mind remains free in places where the body is not. There is also pride, though it may wear modest clothes. Pride in skill. A boiler who knows his craft, a woman whose garden patch thrives, a midwife trusted by the quarters, a carpenter whose joints fit cleanly, a mother whose children know their people's names, pride in keeping order where disorder is imposed, pride in surviving another season, pride in beauty made from scarce means, a clean head wrap, a well-plaited hairstyle, a carefully patched shirt. The plantation tries to claim every accomplishment for itself. Sugar yield belongs to the master. Good discipline belongs to the overseer. Healthy children belong to the owner's increase. Enslaved people quietly keep other records inside the heart. I did that. She taught this. He held us together. We made this meal. We kept that child alive. Historians continue to debate the exact degree to which particular cultural forms on Louisiana plantations preserve direct African continuities versus newer creolized identities shaped in America and the Caribbean. The scholarship is rich, and the debate matters. Yet whatever precise line one draws, the broader truth remains secure. Black culture under slavery was never simply erased and replaced. It was recreated under pressure with astonishing resilience and invention. You think, too, about language itself. The plantation speaks in orders, accounts, and punishments. The quarters speak in stories, warnings, blessings, jokes, lullabies, and names. These are not equal languages. One tries to control, the other tries to sustain. In the evening, by dim firelight, the sustaining language often wins for a little while. Someone tells a child about a relative they never met. Someone offers a proverb. Someone remembers a phrase learned long ago in another place. Speech becomes a bridge over the system's attempt to sever past from present. What remained unbroken was not innocence. Slavery wounded too deeply for that. Children saw too much. Adults endured too much. Bodies carried scars. Minds carried grief. Some people surely felt numb for stretches, or angry beyond words, or tired in ways that made feeling itself seem distant. Survival did not always look noble. Sometimes it looked irritable, guarded, silent, suspicious, or hard. That too belongs in the truth. Endurance is not a polished virtue. It is often messy, It can come with sharp edges. It can leave people changed in ways they did not choose. Even so, humanity remained not as a decorative ideal, but as daily practice. Sharing food when food is scarce, protecting the weak where possible, teaching children caution without teaching them to despise themselves, caring for the sick with herbs, cloth, patience, and presence, marking births, mourning deaths, falling in love, feeling jealousy, seeking beauty, praying in doubt, singing while tired, remembering the absent, planning, hoping, fearing, enduring. These are not small leftovers after history has said its important piece. They are the important piece. The plantation wanted sugar. It wanted obedience. It wanted predictable labour and increasing value. It wanted people who could be counted but not fully recognised. Yet every day it encountered something stubborn: inner life, attachment, memory, belief, habit, taste, humour, skill. These things did not destroy slavery in 1835. It is important to say that clearly. Human resilience is not the same as justice. The existence of tenderness in the quarters did not cancel the violence of the fields. But resilience did mean that the enslavers never achieved total victory over the people they claimed to own. They controlled bodies by law and force. They did not fully command the soul. As night deepens, you can almost sense how the future is already forming in the dark. Children listening, songs carried forward, recipes remembered, stories tucked into sleep. The people in these cabins do not know the dates that later generations will mark, or the exact shape of freedom when it finally comes. But they are already making parts of that future by refusing erasure. A child who learns the family names will carry history beyond the plantation. A song sung softly tonight may echo decades later in another place. A spiritual conviction held under pressure may outlast the entire legal system built to crush it. You stand for a moment outside the cabins and look up. The stars are bright over the cane. The air is warm and damp, brushing your face with the smell of river water, ash, earth, and the faint sweetness that never quite leaves this land. Behind one cabin wall, someone is singing so softly that the melody barely rises above the insects. Behind another, a baby settles at last into sleep. Somewhere farther off, a man coughs in the dark. Life continues in imperfect, exhausted, unmistakably human ways. That is what remained. Not untouched joy, but joy still possible. Not secure family, but family still claimed. Not easy worship, but faith still spoken. Not comfort, but care. Not freedom, yet dignity. Not safety, yet love. Not justice, yet memory. Not peace, yet a stubborn interior life that refused the master's final definition. And if you listen closely, the whole plantation story changes shape. It is no longer only about what sugar extracted. It is also about what black Americans carried through extraction and handed onward despite it. Skills, songs, beliefs, kinship, humour, knowledge of land and body, ways of cooking, healing, speaking, mourning, and celebrating. These inheritances did not survive by accident. They survived because people protected them, often at personal cost, within one of the harshest labour regimes in the United States. So when the night settles completely and the cabins grow still, the deepest truth is not that the plantation succeeded in turning people into sugar. It failed. It produced sugar, certainly, great quantities of it. It enriched men who believed profit could settle every moral question. But the people they exploited remained irreducibly human, carrying selves too vast for any ledger. That humanity suffered. It adapted. It resisted. It endured. And in enduring, it kept alive the possibility that the story would one day be told not from the veranda or the merchant office, but from the lives of those who were forced to make the sweetness and still found ways to remain whole enough to love, remember, and continue. Now the night softens around you. The heat loosens a little, and the air turns gentler as the hours grow late. The cane fields no longer seem sharp and demanding, only dark and whispering beneath a patient sky. Smoke from the last cabin fire rises in a thin silver thread and disappears among the stars. The sounds of the plantation grow fewer. A cradle creaks once. Someone sighs in sleep. Frogs keep their slow, watery rhythm near the ditches, steady as breathing. You let the harsher details drift farther away now, as if they are being carried downriver into the distance. What remains nearest is quieter. The glow of a hearth almost gone to embers. The outline of a mother resting at last beside her child. The hush of a prayer remembered without words. The soft murmur of a song that has outlived the day. In that dimness, human presence feels warmer than the night air, gentle and enduring, like a hand laid lightly over memory. You picture the cabins resting under the Louisiana sky, the people inside wrapped in whatever comfort can be gathered from blankets, closeness, and tired love. Their bodies are weary, but their inner worlds are still their own in ways no owner ever fully understood. Names remain, stories remain, a little faith remains, a little tenderness remains. The stars keep watch above the cane, calm and far away. And the river goes on, moving through the darkness, slow and untroubled, as if carrying every whispered hope towards some dawn not yet seen. So you breathe more slowly now, letting the night widen and the history settle gently around you. The fires have burned low, the voices have faded. Even the insects seem softer at this hour, and in the deep warm dark, where sorrow and endurance have lived side by side, you're left not with the noise of profit or command, but with the quiet certainty that even here, even in such a place, the human spirit kept its small steady light,